One thing about me is that I have somewhat of an obsession with cologne. I have been wearing them every day for years, and I always add it to my everyday routine. It goes without saying that one of the first things a person will notice about you is your scent, and having something that is pleasing to both you and whoever you are around will be a good way to be remembered. This is where Scentbird comes in. Scentbird is a fragrance subscription service that stands out by having more than 700 brands, including iconic names like Lacoste, Prada, and Versace. Buying cologne online can be tricky. After all, you can't exactly smell your screen. But don't worry. Scentbird has a personalized quiz that you can take that allows you to filter colognes based off of who you are as a person. If you are a person who loves the outdoors and enjoys laying in the summer sun and soaking in the ocean, then perhaps you'll enjoy Maritime by Tommy Bahama. Or if you are a night owl who prefers the finer things in life, then Mercedes-Benz Man may be the perfect pairing for your night out. Whether you are in the market for a cologne or perfume, or simply feel like getting your special someone a gift that both of you can enjoy, Scentbird is now available in both the US and Canada. Scentbird is a must for those who want to look good, feel good, and smell amazing. And right now, you can get your own luxury fragrance for only $8 using my code. Scan the QR code on screen or use my code CADABER55OFF to get 55% off your first month at Scentbird. Make sure to use my code CADABER55OFF for 55% off your first month at Scentbird. Truth is often stranger than fiction. This saying has become almost cliche, yet it continues to be proven time and time again. Many real-world cases feature shocking twists and revelations, often enough to rival a Hollywood movie and sometimes even inspire them. However, the gruesome events that would come to shock the people of Czechia in 2007 would turn out to be part of one of the deepest rabbit holes in modern-day crime. The mid-2000s saw Klara Mauerova residing with her two sons, Andrei, age 8, and Jacob, age 10, in her hometown of Qiumei in the Czech Republic. It isn't exactly clear when the boy's father separated from Klara, but it's been alleged that the breakup was spurred on by Klara's fragile mental state and her occasional violent outburst. Despite this, she was, by all accounts, a devoted single mother throughout the boy's infant years, and both boys were described as active and playful. The trio lived with Klara's sister, Katerina, and the two maintained a close relationship. Both sisters were deeply spiritual, with each believing that they were destined to fulfill missions received to them from God. It's been reported that Klara suffered with mental health issues from an early age, including religious delusions, and she may have been schizophrenic. At some point around 2005, Katerina introduced her sister to a girl that she had met, a 13-year-old by the name of Ayoka. Ayoka explained that she was a Norwegian orphan who had been trafficked and sexually assaulted numerous times before escaping her captors. She also described her many health issues, ranging from kidney failure, breathing problems, and leukemia. Concerned for the child's desperate circumstances, and with her strong faith in mind, Klara would agree to help the young girl. Ayoka's introduction came with a flurry of detailed treatment instructions from a man known only as Ayoka's doctor. These instructions, which Klara would later claim were delivered via text message, email, and a single dimly lit midnight meeting in a car, were highly unusual and involved things such as rubbing Ayoka all over her body for hours on end as a way to reprogram her and assist her recovery from all of the abuse that she endured. Klara was also never allowed to attend any hospital appointments, with Katerina assisting being Ayoka's only chaperone. Though initially skeptical of all of these bizarre treatments and circumstances, Clara explained that she trusted the doctor after he showed her comprehensive documentation, including Annika's medical records and even his own diplomatic passport. Clara would begin fostering the teen, and in 2005, Annika moved in with the family. Yet, this relationship, supposedly built upon a genuine desire to want to help, would quickly spiral into something much darker. As Clara cared for Annika and she began to fit in the Mauerova household, the two became incredibly close. Annika would recount her past traumas in detail to a horrified Clara, who gradually focused more and more on her efforts towards helping the young girl recover. The care Clara felt for Annika grew stronger over time. She would later claim that Annika had started to confess that Andre and Jacob, Clara's two young sons, were bullying her, often accusing the children of misbehaving and breaking things. These alleged infractions supposedly grew more mischievous in nature as time passed, and over the course of the rest of 2005 and early 2006, Clara's affection towards her two young sons began to wane. She paid less and less attention to the boys as her care for Annika grew stronger and more involved, and Andre and Jacob were often placed in the care of their grandparents. Eventually, the single mother began preparations to formally adopt Annika, but she would be heavily discouraged by Annika's doctor. They had kept in regular communication via text messages where he continued to send Clara treatment advice. He argued that the authorities would not allow the adoption to take place while her boys were treating Annika so poorly, and that she needed to firmly discipline her sons, an action which he insisted would cure them of their evil spirits. Clara agreed and followed the doctor's advice. Beginning with tough love and stricter punishments, Clara's discipline of her two children would soon ramp up to include flat-out physical abuse. The boys, both under the age of 10, would be regularly beaten, often with instruments such as wooden spoons, and typically they would be beaten for no reason at all. The abuse didn't stop there, however. They were routinely whipped with belts and forced to stay inside a bathroom or closet where they were locked in and imprisoned overnight. Throughout this time, Clara would continually receive text messages from Annika's doctor instructing her on how to abuse her children, and she would dutifully abide. In August of that year, the doctor determined that Clara's treatments weren't effective enough and that the boys needed harsher punishments. Clara was to take the boys to a remote cottage where they would be subjected to even more horrific abuse. She forbade the boys from calling her mother, instead becoming the children's captor. And unfortunately, she wouldn't be the only one administering the abuse. Joining her at the cottage would be her sister, Katerina, and a few other adults who would later be identified as the truth of this horrific abuse emerged. The cottage would serve as the setting for immense torture. The boys were both stripped and locked into small dog cages, being forced to kneel for hours at a time since these cages were too small to allow them to even stand. They were banned from speaking to anybody, including each other, and they weren't let out to use the bathroom, forcing them to sit in their own filth inside those cramped enclosures. Clara would dunk both of her sons' heads into buckets of water and hold them there until they were on the very edge of drowning, while Katerina assisted by holding her own nephew's hands behind their backs to prevent them from lashing out. The abuse was monumental and relentless. Both boys regularly received cigarette burns, electric shocks, deep scratches, and beatings, including being forced to beat and cut one another and themselves while the adults would watch. The assaults were way too numerous and far too brutal for me to list in detail here. However, one of the most sensationalized and stomach-churning aspects of this case came from when they were in that cottage. It appears that Andre suffered the brunt of the abuse. At some point during his ordeal, Andre would be partially skinned, with the group reportedly then force-feeding him own pieces of his flesh. Jacob may also have suffered the same injury, though some sources are divided on this. Members of the group then took part in cannibalizing the pieces of flesh themselves. I just want you to picture that. Being a 10-year-old child, and your mother and your aunt are both there and feeding you own pieces of your skin. And if that's not bad enough, then watching them consume the exact same skin? Yeah. Along with the mysterious doctor, Annika also supported and contributed to the abuse of Andre and Jacob, and continued to spur all of it on by complaining that they were still being mean to her. Annika later alleged that she was also abused by those same adults in the 8 days the group stayed in the cottage. In September of that year, Clara was successful in officially adopting Annika and entrusted custody of Andre and Jacob to her sister, Katerina, who was living elsewhere by this point, as she felt 3 children were too much of a handful. The boys and their aunt would eventually move back in with Clara and Annika around New Year's, where the abuse would restart almost immediately. Where Annika had a nicely decorated room fit for any teenage girl, Andre and Jacob were confined to the dark basement, facing much of the same treatment that they received in the cottage. In order to keep tabs on the abuse taking place underground, one of the women elected to install a baby monitor so that they could watch the boys suffering from the comfort of their kitchen. However, unbeknownst to the Mauerova women, this exact act of cruel surveillance would end up being their undoing. Around May of 2007, local resident Edward Trudy did what any soon-to-be parent would do and installed a baby monitor to keep watch of his newborn. Upon inspecting the camera one morning, however, he was horrified and confused by what he saw. A young naked boy with his arms and his legs bound behind him. Edward tried to make sense of what he was seeing, and he would end up calling the authorities later that day. And, as it turns out, Edward's baby monitor had accidentally picked up the signal of a monitor belonging to one of his neighbors. Police were quick to identify and enter the home of Clara and Katerina Mauerova, despite Clara's protest that she didn't even have any sons, only one daughter. Police eventually came across the padlocked door to the basement, which led them to Andre's discovery. The 2 boys and Annika, seen by an officer to be holding a teddy bear and crying, were taken out of the house and to a children's home, and the women were immediately arrested. However, as police began to delve into the details of the crime, they discovered that things were not quite as they appeared on the surface. This was further supported when Annika fled from the children's home she was staying at and disappeared. As authorities began looking for the now missing Annika, things got even more confusing when nothing could be seemingly found out about this mysterious 13-year-old girl. And the reason for this was because 13-year-old Annika didn't exist. It was merely an alias for a woman named Barbara Skrlova. And Barbara was no 13-year-old girl. She was a 33-year-old woman. Barbara suffered from hypopituitarism, a condition which affected her growth and gave her the appearance of someone much younger. Barbara, perhaps with the involvement of Katerina and the person posing as her doctor, had convinced Clara to attend the adoption hearings with another girl posing as Annika in order to fool the courts, and the ruse had worked. Barbara would end up fleeing to Norway and assume the identity of another teenager there named Adam, where she would again be adopted and enrolled into another school. she would end up being caught 8 months later and returned to Czechia to face trial. The extent of Clara's knowledge of Barbara's true identity isn't clear, though it is evident that Katerina had been aware and for some time, perhaps even assisting Barbara with her own con. During questioning, the three women would turn on each other almost immediately, with Clara claiming to have been brainwashed by both Barbara and the man posing as the doctor, stating in her testimony, "I know I hurt my children, but I never intended to. Horrible things were happening then, and I do not understand now how I could let it all happen." Some sources have reported that the messages Clara claimed were influencing the abuse may have actually originated from a number linked to Katerina. In fact, it remains unclear whether the man known simply as the doctor actually existed at all. Barbara, on the other hand, claimed that she was the third victim of the abuse by Clara and Katerina. Their accomplices in the abuse that took place at the cottage would also be identified and charged. They were revealed to be Barbara's brother, John Sklara, and terrifyingly, Hanna Basova and Jan Turek, two workers from a summer camp that both Andre and Jacob had previously been to. Prosecutors argued that the motive for the abuse was to enslave the boys for religious purposes. The defendants are believed to be part of a religion known as the Grail movement. The movement as a whole has a fractious and controversial history, often being branded as simply a cult. It has splintered into various sects over time, and the nature of the religion itself is a blend of Christianity and New Age spiritualism, allowing each faction to follow its own set of ideals. A spokesperson for the Grail movement actually spoke out following the arrest, stating, "We broke apart with the people involved in this 11 years ago, after they added their own imaginings and fantasies." It's been reported that this particular splinter sect was run by Barbara's own father, Joseph Sklara, though he was never charged in connection with Andre or Jacob's abuse. Despite Barbara's pleas that she was a victim of the Mauerovas, the court found her guilty of having a role in the abuse, and she received 5 years in prison, but was granted conditional release after her lawyer successfully appealed that her mental state was deteriorating behind bars. Katerina was handed a 10-year sentence, with many onlookers to this case believing her and Barbara to be instrumental in the abuse that happened. Barbara's brother Jan Sklara and the summer camp worker Hanna Basova both received 7 years in prison, while the other camp worker, Jan Turek, was only given 5. Clara Mauerova would ultimately be sentenced to 9 years in prison, being released in 2013. Upon sentencing, the judge stated, "Their aim was to create a person with a completely broken will. The boys were repeatedly, psychologically, and physically tyrannized and held in locked rooms." This case is a dark rabbit hole containing countless bizarre twists and unanswered questions. Many have speculated on Barbara's father, Joseph Sklara's potential involvement in orchestrating the torture, believing him to be the cryptic doctor, though this has never been proven, nor has any cult involvement, despite the speculation from prosecutors and others adjacent to the case. What can be said with certainty is that the memories of what those two boys endured at the hands of their own family will continue to leave a bleak shadow on the town of Qiumei and the wider Czech Republic for a long time to come. For many people, graduating high school marks the beginning of a new chapter in life. Seniors are finally able to enjoy the carelessness of summer while relishing in the novelty of adulthood. While their parents may look forward to waving them off to college or employment as their children prepare to fly the nest and begin their own lives. In the case of the Springfield Three, however, this momentous occasion would instead mark the start of an enduring and devastating mystery that would go on to span over 3 decades. The night of June 6, 1992, was set to be a fun one for 19-year-old Susie Streeter and her 18-year-old friend Stacy McCullagh. The pair had attended their graduation ceremony in the afternoon, where family and friends, including Susie's 47-year-old mother, Cheryl Levitt, gathered to celebrate the newest graduates of Kickapoo High School. The girls had a night of partying ahead of them to kick off their summer. Their initial plan for the evening was to go to their friend Janelle's house to attend a neighborhood party, after which their group would head into the nearby city of Branson to spend the night at a motel, ready to enjoy the following day at the local water park. The girls soon changed their minds, however, choosing to postpone the journey so they could all enjoy the party a little longer. Susie called her mom to explain that they would instead be traveling to Branson the following day, and Stacy rang her own mother Janice to relay the same message. Janice would later recall feeling relieved that her daughter had changed her mind about the journey and that she had been worried about Stacy getting into a car accident. Though she had no way of knowing it at the time, this phone call would be the final time Janice would ever hear her daughter's voice. As the party began to wind down, the trio decided to make their way back to Janelle's home to sleep over. Upon finding out their friend's house was packed with unfamiliar visitors, however, Susie and Stacy decided to call it a night and instead head back to Susie's home where she lived with her mother, Cheryl. The girls made plans to call Janelle in the morning to arrange their journey to the water park. Susie and Stacy were last seen by their friends as they left the party at around 2 a.m. Their exact movements after this remain unknown, and it would be many hours before anyone realized that something was wrong. Janelle spent the morning of June 7th calling the house phone of 1717 East Delmer Street, only for it to ring out each time. Stacy and Susie hadn't called as promised, and neither they nor Susie's mother Cheryl were picking up the phone. Puzzled, Janelle and her boyfriend decided to drive to the home to see if they could make sense of anything. Upon arriving, they immediately noticed that Cheryl, Susie, and Stacy's cars were all sitting in the driveway. They also spotted that the porch light bulb was shattered, and wanting to be helpful, swept up the glass that was strewn around the porch, discarding it in a nearby dumpster. Janelle tried the door, and finding it to be unlocked, entered to discover the family dog Cinnamon acting nervous and barking frantically. It was unusual for Cinnamon to be this agitated. In fact, it was the only thing breaking the stillness of the house. It was obvious that none of the women were home, though Janelle would find Cheryl's pack of cigarettes along with other personal items, like makeup belonging to Stacy and Susie. Their purses were also discovered piled up at the door to Susie's bedroom, though Janelle didn't think much of this as nothing appeared to be disturbed, and it was clear to her that Stacy and Susie had made it back to the house the night before. The phone rang while Janelle and her boyfriend were inside. Thinking that it could be her friends calling, Janelle answered. On the other end was the voice of an unknown male who began making vulgar sexual remarks. Janelle quickly hung up, only for the man to call back again and immediately continue making the same inappropriate comments. Janelle would later describe these calls as strange and disturbing, though initially believed them to simply be prank calls. She and her boyfriend ultimately assumed that their friends must have set off to the water park already, so decided to leave the home as they found it. The true horror of the situation would only start to set in later in the day as Janice McCall struggled to get in touch with her daughter. Her concern only grew as the hours continued to pass with no word from Stacy, who had promised to call her before heading out to the water park. After calling friends of Stacy and Susie, who all stated that they hadn't seen the girls since the graduation party, Janice went to the East Delmar home herself to look for answers. The house was as Janelle had first found it earlier that day. Their cars were still in the driveway, their purses, cigarettes, medication, clothing, and other daily essentials were all inside, and the home remained eerily still, with the only exception being the dog's panicked barks. The Springfield police captain would later go on to detail the scene. The only thing unusual about this house was that the 3 women were missing from it. You had this feeling as you looked around that something was missing. That something had to be missing, but there wasn't. Just then. News of the women's unexplained absence began to spread, and friends and family started to gather at the house, hoping to make sense of things. While at the home, relatives of Cheryl would calm themselves by making coffee and tidying up, even repairing a bent window blind in the process. Cheryl's sister Debbie would go on later to explain how nobody could grasp that this was anything but a misunderstanding, still in belief that Cheryl and the girls would return at any time. Janice, meanwhile, would discover a disturbing message containing lewd sexual content left in the answering machine. The police were called, but the exact contents of the message remains unclear, as it was somehow erased before authorities could ever hear it, and their attempts at retrieving the message proved unsuccessful. Missing person reports were swiftly created, and police soon suspected foul play due to the many unusual factors involved. For example, Stacy, whose clothing was found neatly folded inside the house, would have only been wearing a shirt and underwear at the time she left the home. Authorities quickly attempted to preserve what remained of the now inadvertently contaminated crime scene. However, the search for clues at the home would soon come up short, with police failing to discover any tangible forensic evidence to help determine the whereabouts of the 3 women. There's nothing. You have no threads, hair, blood, or even DNA. News of the unusual disappearances would quickly spread throughout Springfield as the days continued to pass, with no sign of Cheryl, Susie, or Stacy. The community were in shock and struggled to make sense of what could have happened to the women the media were now dubbing the Springfield Three. The initial weeks of the investigation received huge attention, though police's efforts had been unfortunately hampered from the beginning, as the crime scene was contaminated. The erased answering machine message may have also contained vital clues and is assumed to be unconnected to the prank calls Janelle received, though this can't be proven. Police determined that the women had to have been abducted between the hours of 2:30 a.m. when Susie and Stacy would have arrived home and 8 a.m. when Janelle first began calling. However, it's impossible to narrow down an exact time frame. Janelle and her boyfriend were questioned as the first people known to be at the scene, yet they were ruled out. The FBI became involved soon after the women went missing, and multiple community-wide searches took place in the immediate aftermath, including a search of nearby Pearson Creek, following an anonymous caller to the police tip line claiming that the women's remains could be located there. No evidence was ever found at Pearson Creek, nor were any substantial leads discovered during these searches. A witness would come forward in July to report seeing Susie on the morning she disappeared. They claimed that she was driving a van and appeared distressed as a man shouted at her from the back seat. Other witnesses reported seeing the van being driven by a blonde woman, and some claimed that they heard screams and screeching tires, but police were never able to definitively link these reports or say with any certainty that the woman seen driving the van was Susie Streeter. Despite hundreds of tips coming in, very few tangible leads would surface. Links to local abductions and other missing person cases were also quickly ruled out. An early suspect did emerge when it was discovered that Susie's ex-boyfriend Dustin Rekla had been recently arrested along with some accomplices for breaking into a mausoleum to steal gold teeth. Susie had allegedly agreed to testify against Rekla, and some sources claim that she had been the only one to initially give his name to the police. Rekla and his associates provided shaky alibis, however, they did each pass a polygraph test, and police had no physical evidence linking them to the disappearances. The men have never been charged in connection with the Springfield Three. Cheryl and Susie's estranged relative, Barrett Streeter, was also investigated following reports that the pair had fallen out with him over his alcoholism. He claimed to have been passed out drunk during the time frame of their abduction, however, and this alibi was supported by his girlfriend's statements. In December of 1992, almost 5 months after the trio disappeared, a call came in to America's Most Wanted hotline. The anonymous tipster claimed to have information related to the case, but hung up while the call was being connected to authorities. Police urged the caller to come forward again, believing he had credible and prime knowledge of what happened to the 3 women, but he never did. In 1996, 4 years after the trio's abduction, a man named Robert Craig Cox would become the prime suspect. By this time, Cox was a convicted kidnapper and robber who was being investigated for a separate murder of a woman in Florida. He had previously been questioned by police regarding the Springfield Three, as he had lived and worked near Cheryl and Susie's home around the time of their disappearances, and may have even worked with Stacy's father at a used car lot. Cox claimed to have spent that night at his parents' house and visited church the next morning with his girlfriend, an alibi that she confirmed. Following his imprisonment for armed robbery, an investigative reporter questioned Cox on whether he knew anything about the missing women. All Cox had to say was this: "I just know that they are dead. That's not my theory, I just know that. And there's no doubt about that." Cox would refuse to elaborate or explicitly implicate himself in the crime, claiming that he would give further details following his mother's death, a stance that he has maintained to this day. The girlfriend who backed up his alibi in 1992 would later recant her statements, claiming Cox had told her what to say to police. Authorities remain divided on whether Cox's claims ring true or whether they are simply false statements designed to bring himself notoriety. Footage of his interview with the reporter was subpoenaed and presented to a grand jury in 1996, though no charges were handed down as a result. Following Cox's cryptic assertions, little headway would be made. In 2007, Kathy Baird, a reporter who had been following and documenting the case, hired a mechanical engineer to use ground-penetrating radar on a section of the parking garage at a local hospital, following tips that she received that the 3 women were buried there. The engineer discovered 3 anomalies during the scan that he claimed were consistent with grave sites. However, police refused to excavate the site, with a spokesperson for the Springfield Police Department arguing that the timing didn't add up. The parking garage had been constructed a year after the trio disappeared, and police believe the digging involved in building the structure would have unearthed any remains. A former assistant for the prosecutor's office of Greene County, where Springfield is located, went on to say that this tip came from somebody who either claimed to be a psychic or claimed to have a dream or a vision about the case. Police determined that the cost in destroying and rebuilding the structure would be illogical, as they don't believe that the tip is credible. It has been over 31 years since anybody last saw or heard from the Springfield Three. Over 5,000 tips have come in to law enforcement agencies in that time, and it remains an open investigation, with various age-progressed photos being released to show what each woman would look like if they are alive today. A reward fund of $43,000 is available for the location and prosecution of the persons responsible for the abduction of the 3 women. The true fates of these women remain shrouded in mystery. Though Cheryl Levitt and her daughter, Susie Streeter, were declared legally dead in 1997, with a memorial bench being dedicated to the trio that same year. The grief and desperation is still palpable for the friends and families. A decade on from the crime, Janelle, the friends Susie and Stacy were supposed to stay with on the night of their abduction, told a journalist that she still wept whenever she saw news footage from the time, stating, "Before the day I die, I want to know who, where, and why." Vigils have been held almost every year since 1992 in memory of the trio. Stacy's mother, Janice McCullagh, who created a nonprofit organization in 1994 to assist families of missing persons, described how it felt as though time stopped moving after her daughter vanished. "Wasn't it yesterday that she left our house after graduating? That long hair flowing back behind her waist? Her niece and nephews miss her, and never had the chance to meet the bubbly, lovable, beautiful young woman with high aspirations." Janice also described how she can't bear the thought of having her daughter declared dead if there's even a slim chance that she's still alive. "I choose to call her missing and hope that someday she will be back." You may have once heard the saying, "A religion is just a cult that's had enough time." It's the idea that any set of beliefs, if they stay popular for long enough, can become accepted as a legitimate, non-crazy way for human beings to live. 10 people staying in a compound praying to an alien species is a cult. 10 million people building temples and running a couple of national governments is a religion. And yeah, if you've ever seen a Facebook post from your edgy atheist friend referring to Easter as Zombie Jesus Day, you know that even a very popular belief system can sound strange outside of its usual context. It doesn't take much to make a religion seem crazy. But there are some belief systems that do make you wonder, is it possible for a cult to be considered too extreme? On April 28, 2021, deputies from the Saguache County Sheriff's Office entered a house in Moffat, Colorado, that was home to members of a new religious movement called Love Has Won. They were there to conduct a wellness check on one of its occupants, a woman whose ID called her Amy Carlson. But her followers knew her by a different name, Mother God. Police had been called in by Miguel Lamboy, a former member of the group who had told them that his child was being held inside of the house. In body cam video released by the sheriff's department, you can see officers moving through a cluttered, colorfully decorated space before reaching a back room, where, surrounded with white fairy lights and a hand-painted sign that read, "The event is here," was something, or someone, wrapped in a sleeping bag, and they weren't moving.
Wow, they painted her. Is it?
That's just, I think, decomp. Decomp mummification. That's what I'm guessing at this point.
The eyelids and stuff.
The eyelids they painted, yeah.
Holy shit.
She,
I didn't even look at it. I was thinking, wow, is that her?
Yeah. This has been a while.
Yeah.
I like this response. I said, there's something back there. I don't know what the fuck it is, but
I couldn't see the face, and I was like, and then when I got closer, I was like, oh, we go.
What it was turned out to be most of the mummified body of Amy Carlson. I say most because nobody seems to know what happened to her eyes. The body had glitter around the eye sockets, and it had been set up in what the sheriff's department described as a shrine. The members of Love Has Won claimed that Carlson had died that day on April 28th, just moments before the officers entered the home. But since people don't mummify seconds after dying, who exactly were her followers getting their orders from? But let's rewind a little. Amy Carlson was born in Kansas in 1975. According to her family, she was a pretty good student, getting mostly A's and B's in school, and was known for her beautiful singing voice. Her parents divorced and remarried other people when she was young, and she grew up bouncing between two homes in Kansas and Oklahoma before her family settled in Texas, first Dallas and then ultimately Houston. Amy and her sister Tara claimed that their stepmother was abusive, but those allegations are so old that they are practically impossible to verify. As a young adult, Carlson had relationships with a number of men, eventually getting married at least 3 times and giving birth to 3 children with 3 different fathers. She managed a McDonald's franchise for a while, and then, in the mid-2000s, things started to get strange. Carlson developed an interest in New Age philosophy, and she began spending a lot of time posting on forums on a website called lightworkers.org. There she met a man named Amaranth White Eagle, who became convinced that she was some kind of divine being, and as all cult leaders do, once she began having followers, she suddenly gained these powers her flock seemed so certain that she had. She began reporting visions and other supernatural experiences in her past forms, including a heavenly voice telling her that she was destined to become president of the United States. In late 2007, Amy abruptly left her 3rd husband and her 3 kids, the oldest of whom was only 12, and her family would never see Amy alive again. The New Age movement is infamously hard to define. It's one of those concepts that scholars of religion get into loud arguments about during academic conferences. The result for this is that while most experts agree that the movement has a large pool of common influences and there are some striking common beliefs, there are so many bits and pieces that any one believer or groups of believers can more or less make up their own religion. Over the next decade, the religious group that would take the name Love Has Won would turn itself into an internet content machine. At the time of Carlson's death, their YouTube channel would be home to more than 2,700 videos that drew in followers from all over the world. Groups sprang up in Central America, South Africa, and Australia. The core group following Carlson around was only about 12 to 20 people, but they managed to rake in cash in the form of donations and sales of nutritional supplements. If you don't know, the nutritional supplement market in the United States has very little in the way of regulation. So much so, in fact, that a lot of the supplements on the market don't even contain the active ingredients listed on their labels. So there's no telling exactly what was really in these supplements Love Has Won was offering. But it is likely that one of the ingredients was colloidal silver, a chemical compound that might have mild antibacterial properties, but it can definitely turn your skin blue or purple if you take enough of the stuff. But Love Has Won started small, with just Carlson and White Eagle posting video clips from Crestone, Colorado, a small city that's become a mecca for New Age and UFO believers over the last couple of decades. Carlson and White Eagle would post soothing messages over music from bands like the Alan Parsons Project, and posted video clips of clouds drifting over the Sangre de Cristo mountain range. Clouds that they claimed were cloaked alien spaceships. At first, they published under the name the Galactic Free Press, and their ideas were mostly remixes of ideas that had been circulating among UFO cults as far back as the 1950s. Carlson began going by the name Mother God, and she called White Eagle Father God. He would be the first of several men to bear that name, and he was the more dominant presence in the earlier videos. Soon enough, though, he and Carlson separated, and Mother God would find a series of new Father Gods to support her quest to save the world. Miguel Lamboy, the man who would eventually call the cops to his house to discover Carlson's body, was actually the first follower to join Carlson. He later claimed that Carlson actually cured him of his end-stage lung cancer. Lamboy would end up being the organizer and mastermind behind most of Love Has Won's business arrangements, even going as far as incorporating the group into a non-profit. There's some question about whether Lamboy took so much power in the group as a way of controlling Carlson behind the scenes, or as a way to shield her from legal repercussion for some of the group's activities. But there doesn't seem to be any real way to know. By the time Carlson hooked up with her last father god, a man named Juan Castillo, in 2018, the lore of Love Has Won had evolved into several bizarre directions. Carlson claimed to be more than 19 billion years old and to have lived over 500 different lives. She claimed to be the former queen and that she was the daughter of Donald Trump. Her followers believed that she was in a constant state of spiritual warfare against an evil force known only as the Cabal. According to Love Has Won, the Cabal were a group of alien reptiles that were hell-bent on destroying the world. And of course, God was also somewhere in there as well. Carlson claimed that the Cabal had tried to assassinate her at least 600 times, but they had failed. She said her past lives included being Jesus Christ, Joan of Arc, Cleopatra, and Marilyn Monroe. Her goal was to gather 144,000 believers, a number significant to Christians because of its inclusion in the Bible's book of Revelation. And she would lead them from the 3D world to the 5D world, according to Amy. Possibly through a starship, or maybe a portal in the ocean, again, according to Amy. By the summer of 2018, Carlson was appearing less and less in Love Has Won live streams, which were now mostly conducted by her followers. Like Carlson's own recordings, the followers' recordings were full of insults and profanity, along with the same recycled garbage every other cult group spits out. As Carlson's appearances grew more infrequent, the believers claimed that dark witches had attacked her, and that she was processing all of the world's negative energy through her body, and that she was breaking through the 7 seals, 7 trumpets, and 7 bowls from the Book of Revelation. If her followers did so much as one thing wrong, they said it would cause her to suffer, which they said would explain why she would scream at them and verbally abuse them during her occasional live streams. Whatever was going on with Amy Carlson, it wasn't good. Her followers insisted that Love Has Won didn't believe in using any kind of drugs, prescription, or otherwise, so she was self-medicating with everyone's favorite painkiller, alcohol. Lots of alcohol. Ex-members would later claim that towards the end of her life, Amy was taking 8 to 10 shots of vodka per night, often drinking straight from the bottle. Followers were subjected to hours-long sessions of interrogation and verbal abuse, meant to discover their secrets and root out any evil from the group. In one videotape session, a follower actually confessed to disobeying an order from Carlson in the year 1431. And what's worse is that everyone believed it. Amy Carlson had brainwashed her followers that much. And of course, for added measure, her followers were all strongly encouraged to cut off all contact with their family and friends. Anyone who wasn't part of Love Has Won. In August of 2020, the group moved to the north shore of the island of Kauai and rented a beachfront house. They claimed that Carlson had cancer and was paralyzed from the waist down. They also claimed that she was the reincarnation of the Hawaiian volcano goddess Pele, which was a pretty much guaranteed way to piss off the local population. After the group ignored COVID restrictions, claimed that the pandemic was a hoax, and generally made a nuisance of themselves to the entire neighborhood, a group of about 100 protesters gathered outside of the house, lighting bonfires, waving signs, and yelling for the cult to get out. Love Has Won finally left Hawaii a month later. Shortly after, Love Has Won returned to Colorado. Carlson's family appeared on the Dr. Phil show in an attempt to convince Carlson to leave the group and get medical attention. Carlson appeared via video chat. She was skeletally thin, and her skin had turned blue, possibly from ingesting large amounts of the colloidal silver that were in those supplements. In April of 2021, Love Has Won was staying at a rental property near Mount Shasta in California, a mountain that they believed was secretly home to the surviving population of Lemuria. On April 10th of 2021, the landlord of that property spoke to Carlson and later said that he didn't think that she had long to live. In the following days, her followers spoke on live streams about Carlson preparing to leave her vessel. A few days later, on the 17th of April, Carlson's family contacted authorities in the town of Mount Shasta requesting a wellness check. An ambulance was sent to the rental property, but her followers turned it away. There is no real reliable account of exactly when and how Amy Carlson died. Her autopsy report describes her cause of death as alcohol abuse, anorexia, and chronic colloidal silver ingestion. Since Carlson's death, Love Has Won has rebranded under the name 5D Full Disclosure, and their supplement company is now going by Mother Nature Natural Essentials. Several splinter groups have popped up, run by former members, but the main organization is still pushing through. They claim Mother God is still with them and still fighting for them, but on another plane of existence. For survivors and refugees from Love Has Won, Carlson's death seems to have provided a little bit of relief from the trauma that they described. For Carlson's family, the feelings are a little more mixed. Towards the end of her life, her followers described her occasionally begging to go to a hospital, a request that they refused because they believed that she had been temporarily taken over by the cabal. Amy Carlson clearly suffered from a serious mental illness, and once she had gathered her followers around her, they were only ever going to make it worse. As her mother told Rolling Stone, she was a victim too. In the days before social media, it was a lot easier for people to just disappear. One day your neighbor or your coworker or even your own relative would be a part of your life, and then the next day they wouldn't be. Maybe they'd gone off to college and nobody would expect to hear from them until the winter break. Maybe they joined the military, or they took a job in another city. They'd move away, and in some cases you would never hear from them again. Nobody seemed to think that this was strange, and growing up in that time, I can say that it wasn't. Long-distance phone calls were expensive. Email wasn't even a thing until fairly recently, and writing and mailing letters was kind of a pain. So sometimes people just left, and all those everyday disappearances provided camouflage for the disappearances that weren't just ordinary life changes. This story is about the other kind of disappearance. Technically, social media existed on May 8th, 2008, when 18-year-old Joshua Vernon Maddux walked out of the door of his family's home in Woodland Park, Colorado, for the last time. Facebook had been around since 2005, and MySpace was still very much a popular platform. But Josh wasn't the kind of teenage boy who lived online, even by 2008 standards. He loved going out for long hikes in the Pike National Forest, which surrounded the small town of Woodland Park, right outside of Colorado Springs. The woods had been a source of comfort and solace for him, especially since his older brother Zachary had died by suicide 2 years earlier. Josh lived with his father Mike and his sisters Kate and Ruth, and everyone describes him as an easygoing, fairly happy teenage boy in the months leading up to his disappearance. He turned 18 in March and was doing well in school. He loved writing music and playing his guitar. In fact, when he vanished, his older sister Kate assumed that he'd simply gone off to become a professional musician, and that they'd hear from him once he became a success or decided to come back home. Josh was a free spirit, and he always told us that he was going to have a great adventure and that he may not talk to us for a while. When he said a while, we thought maybe a few years. It would turn out to be a lot longer than that. Nobody would hear anything from Josh until August of 2015, when 80-year-old Chuck Murphy began demolishing a small cabin less than a mile from the Maddux home. Chuck had owned the cabin since the 1950s, but it was a lot older than that, and no one had lived there for over a decade. The place was in terrible shape, full of rotten timbers, garbage, and animal feces. Chuck was a property developer from Colorado Springs, and he had decided that it was time to turn the forest land around the cabin into 32 new homes. The cabin had 2 sturdy stone fireplaces, so it took an excavator to begin the work of tearing the place apart. But as the chimney's stone and metal structure came apart, it revealed something shocking. Amidst the debris and dust left behind from the fallen chimney, curled up in a fetal position, was the mummified body of a young man. Realizing what he was looking at, Chuck immediately stopped the excavator and called the police. The police called the county coroner, and after a fairly extensive testing, dental records were able to identify the body as Josh Maddux. At first, everyone assumed that they were looking at a horrific accident. People do get stuck in tight places and die more often than you'd think, and chimneys are one of those spaces where it happens. In fact, while researching this video, Josh Maddux wasn't even the top result for the manner in which he was found. That honor went to Zachariah Andrews of Norfolk, Nebraska, a 29-year-old man who was found in the chimney of an apartment building on October 9th, 2023, about a month after he went missing. Bodies being found in chimneys sometimes just happen, which is why the autopsy on Josh didn't immediately raise any red flags. His body showed no evidence of foul play, no broken bones, no knife wounds, or bullet holes. There wasn't going to be any kind of useful toxicology report, being that Josh had been dead for so long, and also the state of his body. And there were plenty of accidental causes of death that wouldn't leave any marks. If Josh died of dehydration or hypothermia after getting stuck, no coroner looking at his body 7 years later would have been able to see that, which is why the coroner ruled his death as an accident. But Chuck Murphy, among others, wasn't convinced. According to Chuck, the chimney where Josh was found had been built in the mid-1990s, and a panel of steel wire mesh had been attached to a set of hooks near the top of the chimney to keep out debris and wildlife. The police investigating the scene didn't report seeing that mesh panel, but the chimney was halfway demolished by the time Josh was found, so that really doesn't mean very much. Animals obviously got into the cabin to leave feces around, but the problem is that they could have entered through the other chimney or any other part of the damaged building. To this day, Chuck insists that Josh couldn't have entered that chimney from the top. So, he entered from the bottom then, right? Well, there are problems with that explanation too. First, everyone agrees that Josh was found in a fetal position with his feet pointing towards the sky and his head pointing towards the ground. Most people trying to climb up a chimney don't do it feet first. And second, they definitely don't do it without their pants on. When Josh was found, he was wearing only a thin thermal shirt. The rest of his clothes, including his pants, socks, and shoes, were found neatly folded inside of the cabin, right next to the fireplace. There's no word on his underwear, but it's not clear whether he was wearing any when he left home. And one final thing that was very bizarre is that a wooden breakfast bar had been actually ripped out of the wall near the kitchen and shoved up against the fireplace, blocking it off from the rest of the cabin. Chuck says that he didn't do that and doesn't know who did. Now, something that stood out to me was this. Woodland Park, Colorado sits more than 8,400 feet or about 2,500 meters above sea level. In early May of 2008, when Josh went missing, daytime temperatures had dropped to about 20 degrees Fahrenheit or between -6 and 7 degrees Celsius. And that's where it's weird. because I really don't know a lot of people who would get naked below the waist and climb into a stone and metal chimney in that kind of weather. Officially, Josh Maddux's death is classified as a tragic accident, but the thing that can't be ignored is the unexplained weirdness in this case. And by this point, no doubt that you were probably yelling at your screen that somebody else must have been involved. The police have received several anonymous tips in this case, but no one stands out above the rest. A few years ago, someone posted on Reddit in response to a question about people who had known serial killers. I wasn't able to find the original post, only copies of it, and it is a Reddit post, so do take this with a grain of salt. The poster claimed to have gone to high school with a dorky hippie kid named Andy, who played guitar in some kind of band and started hanging around with Josh after the OP graduated. The poster claimed that shortly after Josh disappeared, Andy was involved in the stabbing death of a disabled man in New Mexico. When he was arrested, Andy also claimed to have killed a woman and stuffed her body into a barrel. For what it's worth, the Houston Herald did report on that stabbing and on a 21-year-old man named Andrew Richard Newman being arrested for it in 2009. But the poster also claims that Andy had bragged about putting Josh in a hole. They also claim that the police refused to investigate the tips about Andy, although that is hard to confirm. It is worth noting that at the time of his disappearance, Josh was 6 feet tall and weighed about 150 pounds or 68 kilograms. That's a lot of human being for one guy to shove into a chimney from any direction. No matter which way you look at it, the case of Josh Maddux doesn't really add up. If he did put himself into the chimney, why? If someone else put him into the chimney, again, why? If Josh went into the chimney from the bottom, how did he end up in the position that he was found in? If he went in from the top, why did he, or someone else, leave his clothes inside of the cabin, go outside, climb onto the roof of a crumbling building, and put Josh down the chimney? When was the mesh removed from the chimney? When did the breakfast bar get put up against the front fireplace? All of these questions still to this day have no answers. Chuck Murphy says he visited the cabin several times between 2008 and 2015, and he never smelled a dead body. But how? Did Andrew Newman have anything to do with the end of Josh's life? Or did a random Redditor stumble across a gory news article and make up something for internet clout? So far, there's no clear explanation for what took place in Chuck Murphy's cabin on May 8, 2008. Josh's family may never have answers to their questions. We're left with only what Kate told the Denver Post. We'll never really know what happened to him, and it's a horror story in my mind. In the late 2010s, YouTube was flooded with a new kind of content that captured the imagination of millions, those being video game playthroughs and commentary channels. These creators offered more than just standard gameplay. They became personalities, drawing in fans with their humor, skill, and charisma. This era gave rise to a very unique subculture where gamers could transform their hobbies into lucrative careers. The most successful of which often attracted millions of subscribers, turning video games into a massive spectator sport. One of these games that dominated this space was Counter-Strike Global Offensive, known commonly as CSGO. Released in 2012, CSGO became a phenomenon, blending tactical gameplay with lightning-fast reflexes. Its competitive nature and intricate in-game economy fueled a thriving community of players and content creators alike. Beyond the game itself, CSGO became synonymous with high-stakes digital markets, where virtual items like weapon skins could be purchased, sold, or traded for real money. For some, this marketplace was a goldmine, and for a select few, like Trevor McSkillet Heitmann, it was the beginning of a tragic descent.
What's What's going on, guys? McSkillet's here with another CSGO video, and today we're going to be taking a look at something pretty interesting, which is actually how much the entire CSGO economy is worth. Someone actually asked me to see if I could do a video on this in an email, and I thought it would be a pretty cool idea because there really isn't any knowledge out there.
Trevor J. Heitmann, better known as McSkillet, was a rising star in the YouTube gaming community. Heitmann gained popularity through his channel, which primarily revolved around trading expensive in-game items and skins, a niche that attracted a dedicated following. McSkillet also gained traction with videos featuring game glitches, top 10 lists, and tutorials, making him a versatile and well-liked figure in the CSGO community. By leveraging his knowledge of its intricate economy, McSkillet became a prominent voice in the scene, amassing over 850,000 subscribers on his YouTube channel. His ability to turn gaming into a profitable venture through item trading and content curation made him a very influential figure in both the gaming and digital marketing worlds. At the peak of this success, McSkillet owned a popular trading site called CSGO Magic. This platform allowed users to engage in skin gambling, leveraging the high demand for rare and valuable CSGO skins. However, in 2016, Valve, the developer of CSGO, began to crack down on such gambling sites, forcing CSGO Magic to shut down completely. Despite this setback, however, Heitmann managed to continue profiting through his other skin trading and gambling sites. And in late 2017, McSkillet made a bold display of this success when he purchased a 2015 British McLaren 650S, a luxury supercar valued at over $200,000. To showcase this newfound wealth, Heitmann posted a video flaunting the car's impressive features, emphasizing its 641 horsepower and unbeatable performance in drag races.
Alright, what's going on, guys? McSkillet's here with another video, but today I thought I would switch it up and just do a real life video because I've been seeing plenty of new car videos on YouTube for the longest time, and people seem to like those videos. They seem to get a lot of views, so I thought I might as well do one if people like to watch those kinds of videos. Right now, it's not actually like my new car because I've had it for a few months now, but so yeah, if I put new car in the video, the new part is the part you're clickbaited on, not the part itself, like where the YouTubers just like go and film some car they're like looking at, or like make some like sort of meme video, which it was funny when PewDiePie did it, but I feel like at this point, I mean, people just want to see like the actual cars and stuff that YouTubers actually have. But this is the McLaren 650S, of course, and I'm just doing the audio recording over the footage, as you can probably tell, because I don't really know how to be like a YouTube vlogger. I don't really have like a live audio setup.
Heitmann credited his ability to afford the car to his lucrative ventures in CS skin trading, gambling, and gaming sponsorships. His involvement in these markets had not only made him a very prominent figure in the gaming community, but also provided him with the financial means to indulge in such high-end purchases. The McLaren became a symbol of his success, a tangible representation of the fortune that he had amassed through his digital endeavors. However, this extravagant lifestyle would soon come crashing down, as the pressures of his fast-paced rise was finally going to catch up with him. His fortunes took a severe hit in mid-2018 when Valve issued a trade ban on his account, cutting him off from his lucrative skin trading market. This ban reportedly cost Heitmann over $100,000, marking the beginning of a downward spiral that would have tragic consequences. As the summer of 2018 unfolded, Trevor Heitmann's world, once filled with wealth, fame, and fast cars, began to unravel. His lavish lifestyle, propped up by the volatile world of online gambling and skin trading, was on shaky ground. And behind the scenes, the pressures were mounting, and the vibrant persona of McSkillet that was portrayed online was masking a much darker reality. And then, on a seemingly ordinary August day, everything changed. In the span of just a few minutes, the carefree image of a young YouTube star was shattered, leaving behind a trail of devastation that no one could have predicted. On August 23, 2018, the day began like any other, but soon took a dark and unexpected turn. Around 4:30 p.m., Heitmann, driving his 650S, was seen speeding at over 100 miles an hour along the I-805 freeway in San Diego. Witnesses described the car weaving in and out of traffic, displaying erratic behavior that hinted at something far more troubling than just simple, reckless driving. Earlier that day, Heitmann had crashed through the gates of an elementary school in the San Diego area, damaging his car but thankfully leaving no injuries. This incident, however, was the first ominous sign that something was seriously wrong.
Did he like just break through the fence? He just took off. You know you're driving in a school zone, right?
Hey, what's wrong? What you doing here?
What did he just say? Did he say F off to you?
Something's wrong with him.
He's coming back! He's coming back! Hi! You have a crazy ass on your campus right now driving in a sports car, chasing after the kids! I mean, there is a crazy ass. Call 911 right now!
Around 4:45 p.m., Heitmann's McLaren, still traveling at dangerous speeds, collided head-on with a Hyundai SUV while driving the wrong way on the freeway. The impact was catastrophic. The crash claimed the lives of not only Heitmann, but as well as 43-year-old Eileen Pizarro and her 12-year-old daughter, Ariana, who were in the SUV. The collision ignited a fireball on the freeway, engulfing both vehicles in flames and causing a chain reaction crash involving multiple other cars. The scene was one of chaos and devastation, with first responders struggling to comprehend the magnitude of this tragedy. Investigations into the incident revealed that Heitmann had been struggling with significant emotional distress in the months leading up to the crash. His involvement in the volatile world of online skin trading had taken a severe toll on him, especially after Valve's trade ban that cost him well over 6 figures. Friends and fellow YouTubers speculated that the financial and emotional pressures may have contributed to his final, fateful actions. The incident left the gaming community reeling, with many struggling to reconcile the fun-loving, charismatic McSkillet they knew with the desperate young man behind the wheel that day. For those who followed his rise, it was a stark reminder of the unseen pressures that can accompany online fame, and the tragic consequences when those pressures become too much to bear. In the hours leading up to the tragic crash, Trevor Heitmann's family desperately sought to intervene as they noticed his alarming behavior. That morning, just hours before the crash, Heitmann's parents called the police, fearing for their son's safety and mental state. Body camera footage captured the heartbreaking moments as his parents, visibly distressed, pleaded for help. They described Heitmann as emotionally unstable, concerned that he might harm himself or others. The family's fears were rooted in the rapid change that they had seen in Trevor. His struggles with the financial losses from his trade ban and the increasing pressures of his online persona had taken a severe toll on him. Despite the family's attempts to reach out and prevent a catastrophe, their efforts were tragically in vain.
He's got manic behavior.
He's never been diagnosed in which...
He needs to go into a doctor.
Before you start, ma'am, there's a criteria. He has to be gravely disabled. He has to have a credible threat against somebody. He has to have, or harmful to his own self. There's only certain criteria that we can take him under. Who bought the car for him?
He bought it.
He bought it?
He bought a McLaren?
Millions of dollars, yeah.
At 18 years old?
He's a very intelligent kid. He made $4 million in 10 months.
Okay.
So
He's got to teach me his ways.
not right now.
Police responded to their call, but unable to locate Heitmann, were unable to prevent the devastating events that would unfold later that day. The tragic crash had a profound and devastating impact on the Pizarro family. Eileen was described as a loving mother and wife dedicated to helping others. Ariana was a vibrant and talented young girl, full of promise and with a very bright future ahead. The loss of Eileen and Ariana left a deep void in the Pizarro family. Eileen's son Dominic Pizarro took to social media in the days following the crash, expressing his grief and disbelief. The tragedy struck the family with sudden and unimaginable force, leaving them grappling with the harsh reality of losing two beloved family members in such a senseless way. The Pizarro family's pain resonated far beyond their immediate circle, as the story of the crash and its devastating consequences spread across the nation. Their loss became a symbol of the collateral damage caused by Heitmann's final, desperate actions, and a reminder of the innocent lives shattered by that fateful day. In the days following the crash, tributes poured in from across the gaming world, as creators and fans alike expressed their sorrow and confusion. Many reflected on the pressures of online fame and the unseen struggles that Heitmann may have faced. The tragedy did spark a broader conversation about mental health and the darker side of the gaming industry, as well as the real-world consequences that can emerge when virtual lives spiral out of control. In the end, McSkillet's story serves as a stark reminder of the hidden struggles that can accompany public success and the profound impact these struggles can have on others. The tragedy that claimed not only his life, but the lives of Eileen and Ariana Pizarro stands as a somber reflection on the heavy toll of digital fame and the urgent need to address the mental health challenges that often go unnoticed. In the age of digital entertainment, live streaming has become a powerful force in the gaming community. Unlike your standard pre-recorded content, live streams offer viewers a real-time connection to their favorite creators. The immediacy and unpredictability of live feeds draw in millions, creating an interactive experience where fans can engage directly with streamers through chats and donations. This sense of connection, coupled with the excitement of watching events unfold without the safety net of editing, has made live streaming an immensely popular format on platforms like YouTube and, of course, Twitch. Gaming live streams in particular have taken center stage, allowing audiences to watch skilled players navigate their favorite games, celebrate victories, and share moments of tension. Streamers have become more than just entertainers. They're companions in real time, sharing unscripted events with viewers around the world. But in the raw and unfiltered world of live streaming, the lines between reality and performance can sometimes blur in unsettling ways. And for Stephen McCullagh, a YouTuber from Northern Ireland, his live stream served a darker purpose. What began as just another gaming stream would soon become part of a much larger and more disturbing story. One that left a community in shock and raised haunting questions about the real lives behind the screen. Stephen McCullagh, known online as VoteSaxon07, began his YouTube journey in 2010, carving out a niche as a dedicated reviewer of toys, prop replicas, and collectibles. His first video, a review of the sonic screwdriver from Doctor Who, set the tone for his channel, which soon attracted a loyal following of fans who shared his passion for detailed and accurate representations of popular on-screen items. McCullagh's enthusiasm for collectibles, coupled with his keen eye for quality, helped him establish a strong presence in several online communities. Over the years, Stephen expanded his content, becoming a well-known figure within collector circles. His involvement in the news website Following the Nerd and his participation in the Robot Wars team S-Tech solidified his reputation as a devoted fan and knowledgeable reviewer. His channel grew steadily, reaching tens of thousands of subscribers and making him a recognized voice amongst enthusiasts. However, his fame took a dark turn when he became embroiled in the controversy surrounding the murder of his girlfriend, Natalie McNally. The scandal casted a massive shadow over his once celebrated career, transforming him from a beloved content creator to the very center of a chilling, real-life mystery. Natalie McNally was a vibrant and compassionate woman from Lurgan, a town located in Northern Ireland. At 32 years old, she was known for her warm and caring nature. Family and friends described Natalie as someone who brought joy and positivity into their lives, always ready with a smile and a helping hand. Professionally, Natalie worked as a marketing executive at TransLink, Northern Ireland's public transportation provider. She was passionate about her work and was respected for her dedication and creativity. Beyond her professional achievements, Natalie was a strong advocate for women's rights, using her voice to support causes that she believed in, and standing up for what she thought was right. In her personal life, Natalie was eagerly looking forward to becoming a mother. She was pregnant with Stephen's child and excited about the future, embracing the new chapter that awaited her. Her friends and family recall her excitement and joy as she prepared for motherhood, ready to shower her child with the same love and care that she gave to all of those around her. On December 18th, 2022, Stephen was hosting his annual Violent Night Christmas live gaming stream. The event, centered around Grand Theft Auto Vice City, was meant to be a festive, high-energy broadcast where Stephen engaged with his audience in real time. Prior to the event, he sent a text message to Natalie asking her to wish him luck. She responded with a simple, "I might take a look at your live stream later." As the night unfolded, Stephen navigated the virtual streets, completing missions, causing mayhem, and sharing his trademark commentary with his viewers. The live nature of the stream allowed for real-time interaction, with fans engaging in chat, asking questions, and offering suggestions on how he should approach the game. An important detail to note here is that Stephen told viewers that he could not interact with them live due to technical issues, a statement that would later add chilling depth to this case. For his followers, this was an exciting blend of nostalgic gameplay and festive fun. But what if a live stream, intended to offer a real-time glimpse into someone's world, was not truly live at all? What if the entire reason the stream was even happening was for much darker intentions? This unsettling possibility became the reality in the tragic case of Natalie McNally. Natalie was 15 weeks pregnant when she was fatally stabbed in her home. Earlier that day, she had been at her parents' house watching football, but later drove back to her own residence around 7 p.m., as captured by local CCTV. Around the same time, Stephen was engaged in his live stream, which began about an hour earlier, around 6 p.m. Text messages between Stephen and Natalie revealed that he planned to stream all night. However, it later emerged that Stephen's broadcast was pre-recorded. His defense acknowledged that while he claimed to have watched the stream go out online, it was actually filmed earlier and played under the guise of being live. At 7:09 p.m., CCTV footage captured a man matching Stephen's description boarding a bus in Dunmurry and traveling to Lurgan. This man, dressed in a hoodie and gloves, was seen walking past Natalie's home, potentially checking to see if Natalie's car was there. He returned to the area at around 8:52 p.m., and shortly after, neighbors reported hearing a scream. The man was seen later leaving at 9:31 p.m. The following morning, CCTV footage showed Stephen outside of his home throwing away trash, though he was wearing different clothes than seen on the man who had arrived at Natalie's house. The prosecution alleged that Stephen had purchased, changed, and disposed of these clothes. The next day, Stephen traveled to Natalie's home where he would discover her body and quickly call emergency services. Natalie had suffered severe injuries, including compression to her neck, stab wounds, and blunt force trauma. While a knife was recovered at the scene, the blunt instrument has never been found. Stephen was initially arrested but released due to his alibi that he was live streaming during Natalie's death. He was cleared as a suspect on December 24th, but was later formally charged with her murder, as police put together both the CCTV footage and the grim truth behind his alleged live stream. Stephen McCullagh's attempt to fabricate an alibi on December 18, 2022 was a meticulously crafted deception that leveraged a pre-recorded video to create the illusion of a live gaming broadcast. His Violent Night Christmas live gaming stream, as he called it, was a carefully orchestrated ruse designed to mislead viewers and investigators alike. The prosecution described this as an elaborate hoax intended to mask his criminal activities and establish a false alibi. According to Stephen, he began the broadcast at exactly 6:00 p.m., precisely the time he needed to create a convincing cover for his actions. However, cyber experts later established that this so-called live stream was in reality pre-recorded days earlier. McCullagh had planned the timing of this stream to coincide with the time frame during which Natalie was murdered. The prosecution also highlighted several disturbing details within the pre-recorded video. One of those being Stephen making numerous references to being at home and broadcasting live. At the start of the stream, he openly contradicted a promise that he had made to Natalie to not drink during the stream by joking about getting drunk. This remark was made at a time when the prosecution argues that he was actually engaged in violent criminal activity. Significantly, the game features a side mission in which the player murders a woman by hitting her with a car and making it appear as an accident. This side mission, chosen by Stephen at a critical moment, aligned chillingly with the real-life murder of Natalie. The prosecution argued that Stephen's choice to play this particular side mission during the crime's time frame was no coincidence. They highlighted that, during the video, Stephen made several statements that seemed to mock his promise to Natalie and even taunt the viewers. At one point becoming frustrated at his repeated failing of the mission, leading him to chillingly say, "I need to kill this bitch. I need to take her out." Further adding to the sinister nature of the stream, Stephen included a break in the video during which the screen briefly displayed the promotional image for the James Bond film No Time to Die. This image appeared just as Stephen would have been committing the murder, with the prosecution alleging was intentionally inserted to send a taunting message. Upon returning from the break, Stephen claimed that the image had appeared by mistake, although it was pre-recorded and deliberately included. The reference to 007 and the image of the Bond film during the break were viewed by the prosecution as a deliberate nod to his criminal activity. Stephen's initial defense claimed that he was drinking alone at home and fell asleep during the murder. In a further attempt to cover his tracks, he deleted the pre-recorded video from his computer just 5 minutes after the stream had ended. The prosecution characterized this act as part of an elaborate ruse to fabricate his alibi, arguing that only the perpetrator would have precise knowledge of the timing and the details of the crime. The prosecution also further revealed that Stephen, who was initially arrested but released due to the supposed alibi, was the first person to discover Natalie's body. However, he had refused to cooperate with police as a witness following his release, raising further suspicion about his involvement. In the aftermath of all of this, Stephen was permitted to spend time alone with Natalie's body on Christmas night, a request that did nothing but add to the disturbing narrative around his actions. The court also learned that Stephen had recorded grieving conversations of Natalie's family without their knowledge, suggesting that he was monitoring their reactions to assess their suspicions. The prosecution contended that Stephen's staged livestream was not just a failed attempt at creating an alibi, but a deliberate and calculated effort to mislead and to manipulate. The case against him, marked by these chilling details, underscores a disturbing blend of premeditation and overall deceit. Despite the overwhelming evidence, however, including the pre-recorded nature of the stream and his suspicious behavior, Stephen has maintained his innocence. He has pled not guilty to the murder of Natalie McNally and their unborn child. His plea of not guilty adds a layer of complexity to the case, as he continues to deny involvement despite the damning evidence presented against him. This case remains a somber reflection of the intersection between digital deceit and real-world violence, leaving both the legal community and the public to grapple with the unsettling details of Stephen McCullagh's alleged crime. Whether or not you believe Stephen McCullagh is guilty of the crimes that he is accused of is of course up for you to decide based on what has been presented to you. But there is one thing I felt was vitally important to point out. It's confirmed that Natalie was murdered on December 18th, 2022. With everything that you now know, the faked live stream, the cryptic remarks that Stephen made, and his almost complete lack of emotion at the fact that his girlfriend and unborn child had been murdered, I want to point out that if the evidence is true, and Stephen really did commit this horrible and senseless crime, then he is easily one of the most vile humans I have ever come across searching cases. And I say that not only for the obvious reasons, but because the day after Natalie was murdered, quite literally hours after, Stephen uploaded a video to his channel reviewing a lightsaber and carrying on as if nothing had happened. If he's innocent, this obviously means nothing, but if he's guilty, then this video needs to be the nail in his coffin. In the rugged, unforgiving landscape of Sinaloa, a state in northwestern Mexico, a distinct sound echoes through the air, the narco corrido. This subgenre of traditional Mexican corridos is far more than a mere extension of the original genre. Born from the relentless violence and complex dynamics of the drug trade, narco corridos are ballads, narrating tales of power, betrayal, and survival in the underworld. These songs are not just entertainment. They are chronicles of a world where the line between right and wrong blurs, and danger lurks in every corner. Sinaloa, a state with deep ties to some of the most infamous drug cartels in the world, has long been the birthplace of this gritty music. The region's tumultuous history, shaped by poverty, corruption, and cartel violence, provides fertile ground for the narco corrido. These ballads do not shy away from the harsh realities of drug trafficking. Instead, they revel in them, providing a soundtrack to a world that many would prefer to simply ignore. For those living in the shadows of the drug trade, the narco corrido is a voice, telling the stories of those who navigate treacherous paths, where every decision can truly be a matter of life and death. One of the most iconic figures to emerge from this genre was Chalino Sanchez, whose life and death are as haunting and enigmatic as the ballads that he sang. His rise from the harsh realities of rural Sinaloa to becoming the El Rey de Corrido, the King of Corrido, is a story of resilience, determination, and ultimately, tragedy. Rosalino Sanchez Felix, more commonly known as Chalino Sanchez, was no stranger to the violence that would later define his music. Growing up in poverty and surrounded by brutality, his father passed away when he was just 6 years old, leaving him to navigate a world where survival often meant making difficult and sometimes dangerous choices. These early experiences would shape his future in ways that he could have never imagined. At the age of 15, Chalino's life took a dark and irrevocable turn. After his sister was raped, Chalino took matters into his own hands, tracking down and killing the man responsible. This act of vengeance forced him to flee Sinaloa and seek refuge in Tijuana, where he took up work as a coyote, smuggling immigrants across the US-Mexico border, and by 1977, Chalino himself had crossed into the United States, seeking to escape the law and dangerous life that he had left behind in Mexico. In California, Chalino's life was far from easy. He worked a series of low-paying jobs, washing dishes, selling cars, and dealing small quantities of drugs. These menial tasks were necessary for survival, but they also served as a stark reminder of the harsh realities that he had fled. Despite these challenges, Chalino continued to help his older brother Armando in the immigrant smuggling operation, always keeping one foot in the shadows of the underworld that he was so desperately trying to escape. In 1984, tragedy struck once again when Armando was murdered in a Tijuana hotel. This devastating loss became the catalyst for Chalino's musical career. In the depths of his grief, he composed his first corrido, Recordando a Armando Sanchez, marking the beginning of what would become a prolific and influential career. Around the same time that Armando had been killed, Chalino was arrested, and while serving time at La Mesa prison for petty crimes, he found a captive audience for his music. Many of his fellow inmates were drug traffickers, and Chalino quickly became known for his ability to turn their stories into powerful ballads. These songs were more than just entertainment. They were a way for these men to immortalize what they had experienced, often paying Chalino in cash, watches, and even guns. Chalino's raw, unfiltered music resonated with audiences in ways that few other genres could. By the late 1980s, his music had gained a significant following, particularly in Southern California, where the Mexican immigrant community found solace in his tales of struggle and survival. Chalino eventually struck up a partnership with a man named Pedro Rivera, a fellow Mexican immigrant who had established a small recording studio in Long Beach. Pedro helped him produce and distribute his music. Despite humble beginnings, Chalino's cassettes, that were often sold out of car trunks or at flea markets, catapulted him to regional fame. His gritty, unpolished style was a stark contrast to the more commercialized music at the time. But it was precisely this authenticity that drew people to him, and by 1989, Chalino was becoming a rising star, known throughout Southern California for his performances. His reputation as a singer of narco corridos earned him both admiration and notoriety. Yet, with this fame came increased danger. This was no more apparent than on January 25, 1992. When Chalino was performing at a nightclub in Coachella, California, to an audience of 400 people. It was a typical night until Eduardo Gallegos, a 32-year-old unemployed mechanic from Thermal, California, stepped into the spotlight. Being under the influence of drugs and alcohol, Gallegos requested that Chalino play the song El Gallo de Sinaloa. Moments later, Gallegos pulled out a gun and fired 4 shots at Chalino. 2 bullets struck him in the chest, and one of them punctured his lung. In the chaos that ensued, Chalino attempted to retaliate, drawing his own gun, but it jammed. Desperate, he threw the weapon at Gallegos, who continued firing indiscriminately into the crowd. The shootout left multiple people injured, including a 20-year-old bystander named Claudio Rene Carazana, who was accidentally killed by a stray bullet. Gallegos was ultimately subdued by the crowd, who wrestled him to the ground and actually shot him with his own weapon. Both men were rushed to the Desert Regional Hospital in critical condition, but shockingly, they both survived. The Coachella shooting, while nearly fatal, only served to elevate Chalino's fame. His music sales skyrocketed and received increased radio airplay, and at his next performance in Los Angeles, the club reached max capacity 6 hours before he was due to take the stage. The incident solidified Chalino's reputation as a fearless figure in the world of narco corridos. But it also marked the beginning of the end. In the months that followed, Chalino began to live in fear. He had always been aware of the dangers that came with his music, but the Coachella incident really brought out the reality of his situation into sharp focus. He started to distance himself from his possessions, distributing his gun collection to friends and selling the rights to his songs. The money that he received was enough for his wife to buy a house, but it left his family without any future royalties. Chalino seemed to understand that his time was running out, and he took steps to ensure that his loved ones would be taken care of after his death. On May 15, 1992, just 4 months after the Coachella shooting, Chalino returned to Culiacan, Sinaloa, for what would tragically become his final performance. That night, he took the stage, captivating the crowd with his biggest hits. During the performance, a moment occurred that would later be infamous in the history of his life and death. Someone from the crowd handed Chalino a note, which he read on stage. His expression seemed to change immediately, with a flicker of worry crossing his face. Although the contents of this note have never been confirmed, it is widely believed to have been a death threat. Despite this ominous warning, Chalino crumbled the note, composed himself, and continued on with his performance. The resolve that he displayed that night would be remembered long after that final song was played. After midnight, Chalino left the club with his entourage, which included his 2 brothers, a cousin, and several young women. They got into their vehicle and began to drive, but their journey was soon interrupted. A group of armed men driving black Chevrolet Suburbans intercepted them, flashing what appeared to be state police IDs. The men demanded that Chalino come with them, claiming that their commander wanted to see him. Despite these suspicious circumstances, Chalino complied, getting into one of the Suburbans and being driven off into the night. The next morning, the worst fears of those who knew Chalino were confirmed. His lifeless body was discovered by 2 farmers near an irrigation canal by Mexican Federal Highway 15. He had been blindfolded, and his wrist bore the marks of the ropes that had bound him. His death was brutal and unmistakably intentional. Chalino had been shot twice in the back of the head, execution style. The murder of Chalino Sanchez sent shockwaves through the world of narco-corridos and beyond. His death, shrouded in mystery and marked by the same violence he had so often sung about, solidified his status as an enduring legend of the genre. Chalino is buried in the Panteón de los Vencidos in Sinaloa, but his legacy would continue to grow long after his body was laid to rest. In the years since his death, Chalino Sanchez has become an icon, a symbol of the harsh realities of life in the drug trade and the enduring power of the music to tell stories that might otherwise be forgotten. His songs continue to resonate with listeners, offering a glimpse into a world that is both fascinating and terrifying. For many, Chalino's music is a reminder of the price that can be paid for speaking the truth, even when that truth is wrapped in the melody of a corrido. The life and death of Chalino Sanchez are emblematic of the world that he inhabited, a world where violence, loyalty, and betrayal coexist in a delicate balance. His music, like the narco corridos that continue to be sung today, remains a testament to the resilience of those who live on the edge, where every note carries the weight of a life lived in constant danger.
They bound them, they tortured them, they assaulted them, and then they murdered them, and just destroyed our family.
It was a hot summer night in 1990 when Shane Craig kissed her sister goodbye and told her that she loved her. She had no way of knowing at the time that this warm farewell, one that they shared so often, would be something that she would reflect on for years to come. The devastating events that would occur in the short few hours following her departure would leave Shane and many others haunted, disgusted, and desperately seeking answers. It was August 21st, 1990 in Texas, when 22-year-old Cheryl Henry said her goodbyes to her sister Shane outside of a nightclub. Cheryl and her boyfriend, 21-year-old Andy Atkinson, had been enjoying a double date with Shane and her partner, and the couple were now ready for some alone time. The relationship was new and exciting, and the pair were completely smitten with one another. It was around 11 p.m. when the couples parted ways, with Cheryl and Andy headed for an undeveloped area near Briar Forest in West Houston, a secluded location that often served as a lover's lane for young couples. Cheryl would not return home from her date that night. Panic began to set in when her family discovered that she also hadn't shown up for work the next day. In fact, nobody had seen Cheryl since the night before, when she said her goodbye to her sister outside of the club. Her family was sick with worry and contacted police that morning to report her missing. Andy's grandmother, whom he lived with, also began to worry when he didn't arrive home. She called Andy's father, Garland, with her concerns, but he wasn't too distressed, initially believing there would be some rational explanation for his son's absence. I said, he had a date. He'll be 22 in 2 weeks. Maybe they went somewhere together, you know? They are adults. However, Andy's family would soon receive a call from Cheryl's parents explaining that she had also not returned home, nor had she been in contact with anybody. It was at this point that the Atkinsons raised the alarm. Panic would grow for both families as they learned that Andy's car had been located. It was the evening of the 22nd when a security guard for a local business found the car parked at the secluded Lover's Lane area near the forest that they were going. The front seats were found reclined and the keys were in the ignition, though the engine had been switched off. Cheryl's shoes and purse sat in the passenger footwell, but there was no sign of her or Andy. The most concerning discovery made within the car was a splatter of blood, and it appeared fresh. An officer ran the vehicle's license plates and, upon discovering that the car belonged to a missing person, called in for a canine unit to search for the couple. It was shortly before midnight when authorities stumbled upon a gruesome discovery. Lying roughly 200 yards from the car, under a stack of rotting boards, was the body of 22-year-old Cheryl Henry. She was found face down and completely naked. Her clothing had been cut from her body and was discarded nearby. Her hands were bound behind her back with rope, and an autopsy would later conclude that she had been viciously raped before having her throat slashed repeatedly. Officers would discover a few bizarre things of note surrounding the scene of Cheryl's murder. Deflated balloons hung limply from a nearby tree branch, and a $20 bill lay near her body. The search for Andy was postponed until first light, when officers would eventually find his body as well. He was discovered tied to a tree about 50 yards from where Cheryl was found. He was still clothed and his hands had been bound behind his back, just like Cheryl's. Andy's throat had been cut so deeply that reports describe him as being nearly decapitated. The murders were brutal and horrific, and the crime only seemed to grow more savage as the details emerged. Police discovered a golf club and 3 golf balls, possibly belonging to Andy, in a field close by. The items had been arranged to form a crude arrow that pointed in the direction of Cheryl's body. Detectives would also reveal to Andy's father, Garland, that Cheryl had been killed first, which means he was tied to a tree and listened to her scream, listened to her being murdered, knowing that they were going to do the exact same thing to him, and he couldn't do anything about it. That's very hard to accept. Cheryl's mother, Barbara, was inconsolable and had to actually be physically restrained by police officers when she learned that the cadaver dogs had found her daughter. Garland would refuse to go to the morgue to identify his son, unable to bear seeing him in such a state. Though the search for the young couple had come to an abrupt and devastating end, the hunt for their killer was only just beginning. Police were quickly able to rule out robbery as a motive, since money was discovered both on Cheryl's body and in Andy's pocket, though the crime scene told them little else about the perpetrator. Nobody had witnessed anything suspicious in the area, and there was little physical evidence, save for a semen sample collected from Cheryl's body. Testing conducted at the time yielded no matches. Detectives questioned friends and family members and requested blood samples from those with close ties to the couple. Some of those working the case believed that the killer could have known both or at least one of the victims and followed them from the nightclub, including Houston Police Detective Darkus Shorten, who thinks that the use of a knife makes the crime seem more personal. Frustratingly, however, these avenues of investigation have led nowhere. The tips police received from the public also failed to produce any real leads. While progress began to stall in the case of Cheryl and Andy, their families tried to process their own grief. Andy's family chose to give him a closed casket service, with his father explaining, "I don't want to see anyone I love in a box. I will remember him as I saw him the last time that he was alive." And Cheryl's family feels the same way. The case grew stagnant and would remain so for over a decade, until a strange clue reignited police hopes for a breakthrough. In March of 2001, Houston's Homicide Division would receive a handwritten letter in which the anonymous sender claimed to have information on Cheryl and Andy's killer. The writer wanted $100,000 and instructed police to respond by placing an ad in the personal column of the Houston Chronicle to be published on the 12th of that month. The note also warned that the writer had hired a lawyer to ensure authorities played it straight. Investigators would comply with these instructions, compelling the sender or their supposed lawyer to call in, but nobody ever did. Police held back on publicizing the note initially, fearing that it would scare off the anonymous sender and potentially hamper their case. However, the contents of the note were eventually made public in 2004. Investigators still haven't determined whether or not that letter was a hoax, though they have said that it contains no identifiable prints nor any usable DNA. It wouldn't be until 2008 that a breakthrough would be made in the case. The DNA collected from Cheryl's body had been linked to an unsolved rape and burglary from 1990, a few months before the murders. The victim in that case worked as an exotic dancer at a club, not far from the one that Cheryl and Andy had visited on the night of their deaths. She had just returned to her boyfriend's apartment in Northwest Houston when she was attacked in the bedroom by a man holding a gun. He bound her hands behind her back and covered her mouth and eyes with duct tape before throwing her onto the bed. The victim recalled having a bag or pillowcase placed over her head and described how the man taunted her by placing the barrel of a gun to her throat, repeatedly cocking it and uncocking it. After sexually assaulting her, the attacker stole $250 from the home, disconnected her telephone, and fled. Despite 18 years passing since that brutal night, and the fact that the attacker had tried to conceal his identity by wearing a fishnet stocking over his head, the victim in that case was able to remember her attacker's face clearly, working with a sketch artist to create an image of her rapist and possibly Cheryl and Andy's killer. The woman was also able to describe what her attacker had been wearing: black gloves and a dark-colored shirt with matching pants. That may not seem like much, however, it has been theorized that that clothing resembles a security guard's uniform. Other exotic dancers at local clubs would allegedly come forward as victims after seeing that sketch, though the reporting on this is very scarce. Despite this breakthrough, police have been unable to track down the man in the sketch. Recent years have delivered few updates in the case, though it is not without promise. Detective Shorten announced in 2017 that they would be looking into familial DNA via genetic genealogy. This relatively recent advancement in forensics has proven crucial in identifying several suspects, including the man responsible for the murder of 2 teenagers in Montana in 1956. Patty Kalitsky was sexually assaulted before she and her boyfriend Dwayne Bogle were murdered on a lover's lane. That crime remained unsolved for over 65 years before the murder was linked via familial DNA. The families of both Cheryl and Andy remain hopeful that their killer will be identified using this method much sooner. Theories on this case remain divided, with each investigator maintaining their own suspicions. The lead detective at the time of the murders, Billy Belk, had stated, "Sometimes I think they were targeted. Cheryl was tied up more than Andy was, even though he was tied to a tree. Sometimes I wonder if there are 2 or even 3 suspects. Some have theorized that the killer, or killers, may have been targeting very specific victims. The women who were assaulted were returning home from a shift as an exotic dancer, and it had been reported that Cheryl had worked as an exotic dancer at some point prior to her murder, though this is unconfirmed. Andy was also said to have occasionally worked as a doorman at one such club, causing speculation that the perpetrator may have worked at or frequented strip clubs in the area. It has also been speculated that the same person may have been involved in the unsolved disappearance of Tara Breckenridge, a waitress from another club in Houston who vanished in 1992. Until a killer is identified, however, this link remains unproven. It has been 33 years since Cheryl Henry and Andy Atkinson were viciously murdered. And for me, it puts that date into an even deeper perspective. I was born less than a month after this crime occurred, and for my entire life, this case has remained unsolved. I personally cannot begin to imagine how that affects not only her family and people that have loved both Andy and Cheryl, but also the investigators on the case. Having a case go completely stagnant for 33 years, my entire life, is very hard to fathom. And while yes, 33 years is a very long time, the pain of their loss remains raw for the many loved ones of Cheryl and Andy's. In fact, Cheryl's mother Barbara still wears her daughter's ring and watch to this day, and often pictures her in heaven. But unfortunately, she remains haunted by the circumstances of her daughter's death. To think her last moments were of terror, and I wasn't there. Because mothers, that's their job, to make it better. Andy's father Garland believes that the murder was committed by more than one person, or perhaps somebody with ties to his past. Garland spent some time in the late 80s imprisoned on drug charges, and although police have never found any kind of connection there, he still feels Andy's loss deeply. We were not only father and son, but best friends as well. You see things on TV, you read things in the paper, but you never imagine that something that drastic, that horrifying, could be happening to someone you love.
It's been 31 years since Ronnie, Doreen, Ryan, and Russell Jack vanished without a trace in Prince George, BC in 1989.
Whoever knows something or know where they are, they can come forward and just please let us bring our family home. I don't care about the justice part of it. Justice is not in the picture anymore. It's about bringing my family home.
Cases where multiple people go missing together and are never found usually gather a decent amount of media attention and public speculation because of just how uncommon and perplexing they are. This, however, doesn't seem to have been the case for the family of 4 who went missing on August 2nd, 1989, from Prince George, British Columbia, in Canada. Widely unreported, the family of the young adults who went missing with their children still fight to get attention to their case. The Jack family was comprised of Ronald Ronnie Paul Jack, born March 29, 1963, Doreen Ann Jack, born April 24, 1963, and their 2 children, Russell, aged 9, and Ryan, aged 4. Both Ronnie and Doreen grew up in the Cheslata Reserve just outside of Burns Lake, a rural village in the northwestern central interior of British Columbia. Maria Jack, Doreen's younger sister, has described it as a place where everybody knows everybody, something that I can relate to from the town that I grew up in. She said of growing up in the area, it was a community where, to travel, we used horse and wagon. Our grandparents had 4 Clydesdale horses and they were beautiful. When we needed to get water, we had to go from the grassy plains all the way down to the south bank, fill up our canisters with water, and then bring it back up. Ronnie was reportedly from a big family, being one of 6 brothers. He was described as being extremely nice, extroverted, and passionate, but was a somewhat intense and complicated person. He was incredibly close to his mom even after moving out, and Doreen's sister Maria has stated when Doreen was going through tough times, Ronnie was there to help her by supporting her financially as well as encouraging her to take educational courses and driving lessons so she could have her independence. Despite this, she stated that Ronnie could get out of control, even going as far as saying that she witnessed him hitting Doreen on more than one occasion. Doreen's tumultuous upbringing was marked by violence, poverty, and sexual abuse at the hands of her father's friends. Her 2 sisters, of which she was the oldest, Maria and Lorene, also went through the exact same situation. All 3 of them had been abandoned by their mother at a young age, so they grew up with their father, who couldn't cope with his wife's absence and struggled heavily with alcohol, which led him to, at his worst, drunkenly shot at the girls as a way of telling them off, before passing out and locking them outside to sleep in the cold. With all of the hurt and trauma, Doreen grew up to be incredibly resilient. Marlene states that she was both easy to be around but also surprisingly stoic when it was required of her, while simultaneously being rebellious. Despite sometimes abusing alcohol and other substances, even Ronnie's mom would say that Doreen was hardworking, quiet, polite, and didn't cause any trouble. All 3 sisters were forced into a residential school where all of them reported being abused physically and verbally by the nuns. For these reasons, both Lorene and Maria admit the 3 were never able to truly become close as sisters. Apparently, Russell wasn't even Ronnie's biological son. While in college at the age of 17, Doreen had been raped by a student. Doreen never went to the police about this because, to quote her sister Maria, "In a racist town, how can you?" So, in February of 1980, Russell was born. 5 years later, on July 26, 1985, baby Ryan was born. Ronnie's cousin had stated that the couple were happy and that Ronnie treated Russell as his own and wanted to work and make a living for his children. However, cracks were beginning to show in their relationship by the year that they disappeared. Doreen would sometimes drink heavily, as her demons were catching up to her while staying home with the children full time, and Ronnie's temper had become explosive. Yet still, he was working full time doing odd jobs. They had been living on welfare due to a back injury that Ronnie had suffered while working at a sawmill, which left him unable to work after. The Jack family had been living in their home for approximately a year before their disappearance, and Ronnie was desperate to work. One cousin reported seeing Doreen stealing cough medicine for the boys, and a few months before the tragic disappearance, Ronnie told his mother that he owed someone some money, but she couldn't get it to him before he disappeared. They were undoubtedly down on their luck. So, on the night of Tuesday, August 1st, 1989, Ronnie decided to go down to the local bar to have a few drinks and unwind. Ronnie was at the First Leader Pub, described by numerous sources as a sketchy drinking hole that wasn't far from his home, reportedly only 4 blocks away. While he was there, however, he thought he had struck gold for his family. It's unknown who or how the conversation started, but Ronnie got an offer, a really good offer. A man, described as being in his late 30s, offered Ronnie and his wife Doreen temporary jobs at a logging camp, thought to be around 40 kilometers west of Prince George. The pay was reportedly high, and they would be there for between 10 days and 2 weeks, possibly longer. This is the break that they so desperately needed. Ronnie would be in charge of cutting down de-limbed trees into logs, and Doreen would be a cook's helper in the camp's kitchen. Soon after the arrangements were made and the plan was in motion, Ronnie had just 2 phone calls to make. One call was to his parents' home, He spoke to his mother, Mabel, and relayed all of the information to her, and told her that they'd be back well before Russell started school that September. He sounded hopeful and excited, and knowing how badly they needed this, his mother didn't discourage him, even though the offer seemed too good to be true. But something was said at the end of that particular call that has never left her mind. Her son said something to the effect of, "If I don't come back, come looking for me." Since so much time has passed, the exact quote has changed a few times, from, "We'll be back in 8 days, Mom, don't worry about us. But if I don't come back, look for me," to, "Mom, if I don't come back, come looking for me at the house." And even, "If I don't come back, you look for me between Vanderhoof and Lucas Lake." Whatever the exact words were, the sentiment was the same. He didn't sound nervous or afraid. The call then quickly ended. The other call was about Russell and Ryan, although some accounts differ on how the following subject came about. But here is what we know for sure. The children were brought up in conversation. Apparently the offer was just for the couple, as Ronnie ended up calling his brother at 11:16 p.m. and asked him to look after the kids, but he refused. The man from the bar then suggested bringing the kids along, as they had a specific place at the camp for them, a daycare. It was now the dead of night, and witnesses would report seeing Ronnie and the unknown man leaving the pup together, and since the Jacks didn't have a car, the man had offered to drive them to the job site that same night. According to the RCMP investigators, the man accompanied Ronnie back to his residence and waited while the family packed. Doreen's cousin, according to multiple sources, including the RCMP's constable Judy Thomas, who at one point was a lead investigator on the case, claims to have been at the property at midnight and is the only person who saw the unknown man, and was able to later describe him to investigators. He is also the only person to have seen the family leave with the unknown man after Ronnie's call to his parents. Yet, in a later article from February of 2000, a lead investigator would claim that the previous description of the unknown man turned out to be unreliable because it was based on sketchy information from a cousin. The alleged miscommunication described led to the RCMP to not pursue a proper investigation until several months later, with one source reporting that they may have only taken the description and sketches of the man in December of 1989. Constable Judy Thomas would later admit that she did not actually know where those sketches had come from, telling one family member that they were just simply in the case file. The clock reads 1:21 a.m., the early hours of August 2nd, 1989, and all four members of the Jack family were seen leaving their home at 2116 Strathcona Avenue and piling into a man's four-wheel drive, dark-colored pickup truck. And that's it. 4 people, including 2 children, have been gone, just like that, for more than 30 years. Ronnie had stated that the family would be gone for a while, so they weren't reported missing right away, costing the investigation valuable time. An official report was filed on August 25, 1989. According to Mabel, the police went to the home where they searched the property and took pictures, noting that the family left the majority of their furniture and clothes behind. You'd think that a family of 4 going missing after leaving with a man for a new job would create a media frenzy, but this wasn't the case. Most people attribute this to the fact that the family was indigenous, as the RCMP is notorious for under-investigating crimes or disappearances where the victims were of indigenous descent. Only one paper picked up the story, the Prince George Citizen, on Wednesday, August 30th. And even here, they did the family wrong by stating in the headline, "Burns Lake family missing," when the family was from Prince George. The Prince George Citizen then reported the family, stating that they were safe on September 7th, 1989. This never happened. In fact, at the time, Mabel moved into the Jacks family home so she could use it as a sort of home base so she could make further searches in the bush alongside her husband and their sons. A few months later, the family contacted the RCMP for an update on the case. This is where they found out that the case had been closed because the RCMP were under the impression that the family had been found but couldn't give any details on how they got to this conclusion, and the investigation was quickly reopened. In February of 1990, the Prince George RCMP teamed up with Crime Stoppers to create a missing persons poster of all 4 family members, and a $2,000 reward was offered for any information leading to the whereabouts of the Jack family. In the fall of 1990 and the spring of 1991, Crime Stoppers created a reenactment video which ran for 3 weeks on TV, but unfortunately, no leads had emerged. The first solid clue came but 7 years later. It was an early Sunday morning on January 28, 1996. The clock struck 8:33 in the morning, and a call comes in to the Vanderhoof police with a brief but striking 10-second message.
The Jack family are buried in the south end of the ranch.
The dispatch had no time to ask any questions before the call ended. And unfortunately, experts were unable to decipher the location of the ranch from the tape provided. Investigators attempted to lure the caller back by publishing several appeals in local newspapers asking them to call again, but no one ever did. A few months later in March, the voice recording was analyzed by the University of British Columbia, but what they found doesn't seem to have been made public. What we do know, however, is that the police were eventually able to trace a call to a house in Vanderhoof where, at the time of the call, a party had been going on. There were between 6 and 9 people at that party, but investigators were unable to locate all of the partygoers. With media attention and pressure brought on by the efforts of the family members, the RCMP have conducted hundreds of interviews, obtained thousands of documents related to the case, and combed through numerous properties in search of the 4 missing family members. Yet still, to this day, no trace of the Jack family has ever been found. The unknown man that offered them the job was described as a Caucasian male between 6 foot and 6 foot 6 inches tall with reddish brown hair, a short, full beard and mustache. His hair went to the bottom of his ears and it was parted on one side, and at the time appeared to be in his late 30s and approximately 200 to 275 pounds. He was wearing a baseball cap, a red checkered work shirt, faded blue jeans, a waist-length blue nylon jacket, and work boots with leather fringes over the toes. This man, still to this day, has never been identified. There are a number of different possibilities as to the fate of the 4 family members, some believable and some very outlandish, and I am not going to insult the family and loved ones by theorizing ridiculous avenues such as ghosts or aliens being responsible, but there are 3 to me that stand out. The first is that both Ronnie and Doreen were the targets. The first theory dictates that both adults were the targets of the disappearance. The man is honest in his quest to find workers, but his operation was either illegal or lacked the proper permits. The Workers' Compensation Board of British Columbia, operating as WorkSafe BC, existed back then but didn't operate the way they do now, and Indigenous people speaking out on unsafe work conditions was often overlooked. They could have been hired for an operation where they got severely injured or even killed and have gone unreported. This wouldn't explain where the children went, however, or how no one else seems to have been hired from any nearby towns to that location. The second theory is that only one of them was the target. Ronnie reportedly owed money to someone as he asked his mother for help to pay off the debt. He never gave any specifics on what this debt entailed, which leaves room for a lot of speculation. The man could have made up a position for Doreen to take the deal to seem more appealing so as to not make Ronnie suspicious. If Doreen was the target, even though she is reported as keeping to herself and not causing trouble, they could have taken Ronnie for the same purpose. Less suspicion and more exciting for the family. A study focused on 4 sites in the continental United States and Canada revealed that up to 40% of sex trafficking survivors were either Native American or First Nation women. Yet, those same women make up less than 10% of the overall population at each of those sites, showing the disproportionately high human trafficking impact on Native Americans and First Nation. The third theory is the first theory that police ran with because it was honestly the most obvious. It was a car accident. The family and the man were involved in a vehicle accident and were hidden in a dense bush off the side of the road. Police seem to have dropped this theory after the area was thoroughly searched. Aside from not ruling it out through searching, there's another indicator that this was likely not the case. If the unidentified man who offered them the job was in the crash, he would have been reportedly missing by his family, or at the very least, his employer. But no reports ever came in. If he managed to survive, then there's a gray area, where he could have easily killed the rest if any survived to avoid jail time. This would fit for both the unknown man and his truck to still be missing. Ronnie's mother Mabel faced yet again another missing persons case in her household in September of 2005. Her husband, Cazimel Thomas Jack, Ronnie's father, went missing at the age of 70 when he left early in the morning for a hunting trip. Local volunteers, search and rescue, family members, and the RCMP searched for him to no avail. Years later, someone came up to her with Cazimel's prize knife and said that he'd given it to them, which she doesn't believe. His case only appears on one website which recorded him as an abduction case. And tragically, nearly 20 years later, he's still missing. Cazimel Thomas Jack stands at 5'10", weighing 160 pounds, with gray-brown hair. He was wearing glasses with a gold frame, a red ball cap, green jacket, blue jeans, leather lace-up boots, and leather gloves. In 2017, Marlene Jack, Doreen's sister, testified about her sister's disappearance at a hearing that was part of the Canadian inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. In her testimony, she revealed that during the investigation, she was threatened by authorities that if she spoke to the media about the case, they'd stop giving her any updates on it. There will always be a ton of speculation, especially online, as to the fate of this family. One person doesn't just vanish into thin air, let alone 4. This year marks the 35th anniversary of the disappearance of Ronnie, Doreen, Russell, and Ryan. No trace of them has ever been found. Their families fight tirelessly to keep their names floating in the media in the hopes that someday their prayers for justice will be answered. On May 23, 1997, just after midnight, a phone call was made to the New York City Police Department. On the other end of the line was a millionaire named Angelo Abdella. He was the vice president of CPC International, a company that owns several well-known grocery brands like Hellmann's and Skippy. Angelo was calling to report that his 15-year-old daughter, Daphne, was missing. Dispatch sent out Detective Lee Furman to the call shortly after, and he met Angelo in the lobby of the Majestic, a high-end apartment towering over nearby Central Park. It was a little after 1 a.m. and Angelo explained to Detective Furman that Daphne hadn't come home that night, and he was concerned due to her history of self-destructive behavior. While Detective Furman was talking to Angelo, the doorman of the apartment mentioned that if they were looking for Daphne, they should probably check the utility room just off the building's lobby, because he was pretty sure that he had seen Daphne go in there a little while earlier. As both Detective Furman and Angelo made their way to the utility room, hoping to solve this mystery before it even took off, they were a little surprised to indeed find Daphne in the utility room. However, she wasn't alone. Daphne was with her boyfriend, 15-year-old Christopher Vasquez. They were both naked and appeared to be bathing each other, washing off the grime of the city, and a little bit of blood. Thinking Angelo would be both relieved to find his daughter safe, but furious to see her bathing with her boyfriend, it came as quite the surprise that all Angelo had to say to this remarkable sight was simply, "What time did you get in?" Now, you may be a bit confused or wondering if I have left something out, since that isn't exactly the response you would expect to hear from a father, especially after finding his daughter in such a compromising position. But the thing is, for both Daphne and Christopher, what was being seen by both her father and the detective was the culmination of a ticking time bomb that had finally exploded. Daphne Abdella had been spiraling for years by this point. She'd been orphaned as a young infant, and Angelo and his wife, Catherine, had adopted her before she was old enough to remember anything other than her very extravagant life. Daphne attended the most prestigious schools, traveled long distances to go snowboarding in the winter, and took vacations in Europe. Angelo was an Israeli businessman who had married a French model. So Daphne was living the high life all over the world from her earliest days. Her parents were devoted to her, covering their refrigerator with photos of her at all ages, and her bedroom in their duplex at the Majestic was full of books, toys, and electronics, all the finest that money could buy. Something had never quite clicked for Daphne. Around the time she entered her teens, she began drinking alcohol, smoking weed, and fighting with her parents. Classmates who were later interviewed by the New York tabloids claimed that the Abdellas never showed up for their daughter's swim meets or any other events, that they were distant and didn't care for her, at least not in the way that she needed. By the time she was 15, Daphne had been through 2 different stints in rehab and had joined Alcoholics Anonymous. But she ended up quitting to go back to drinking in the park with her friends. She told the staff that she was simply too young to be an alcoholic. Christopher Vasquez, on the other hand, was different from Daphne in every single way. He was a middle-class kid from Spanish Harlem being raised by a single mom. He was both a Boy Scout and quite literally an altar boy at the Catholic church near his home, where he took his grandparents every Sunday. His family and friends described him as a very sensitive boy who suffered from agoraphobia. He was also small for his age and was bullied for it at school, being commonly referred to as a herb. It's not clear what sent him on his downward spiral, but meeting Daphne Abdella seemed to have accelerated it. Once they ran into each other while rollerblading in the park and became friends, Daphne quickly had Christopher wrapped around her finger. Now, going back to the scene of where this story started, in the utility room of the Majestic. When Detective Furman asked both teenagers how they'd gotten bloody, the kids claimed that they had fallen while rollerblading in the park, which was consistent with the small cuts over Christopher's eyebrow and the injuries to his hands. At this point, Angelo had decided that he'd had enough of involving police in this matter and told the officers that he could take it from here. Detective Furman and the other officers agreed and left the building. They didn't get far away before a call went out over the radio. Someone at the Majestic had called to report a body in the lake at Central Park. Not just the Majestic, however. Actually, the call had come from Angelo's number. Detective Furman agreed to take the assignment and turned his car back around, heading back towards the glittering tower beside the park. Soon after arriving, the officers found themselves back in Angelo's kitchen, watching Daphne eat macaroni and cheese while she talked. She shooed her father out of the room and told the cops the story that she claimed she'd been too afraid to tell them in the utility room. She'd waited until Christopher went home before owning up to the truth, or at least a version of the truth. According to Daphne, both she and Christopher had been hanging out at the park when Christopher went crazy and killed some guy, according to Daphne. Daphne claimed that she had tried to perform CPR on the victim, but then gave up and suggested that Christopher gut the corpse and fill the abdomen with rocks to make sure that it would sink to the lake. Quite a bit of a stretch from performing CPR to that, but this story does get weirder. The story struck Detective Furman as strange almost from the beginning. Most people who witness a brutal murder don't start trying to help the killer hide the body after all. And according to Detective Furman, Daphne was entirely too calm for his liking as she told her gruesome tale. Being skeptical about the entire thing, Detective Furman radioed in to have 2 patrol officers check the lake for a body. And to his surprise, they found one. A little over an hour later, at around 2:30 in the morning, the patrol cops found a corpse in the water near a gazebo on the Central Park Lake. There was also a trail of blood somewhere between 40 and 50 feet long leading to the gazebo. The body belonged to a white male over 6 feet tall with dark hair and a mustache. He was found floating vertically, with his head towards the surface, and his intestines floating around him. They had spilled out from the gaping wound in his abdomen. He had more than 30 stab wounds, including a cluster of 8 to 10 stab wounds close together in his chest. His head, hands, and nose had been hacked almost all the way through, nearly severing them from the rest of his body. There was no wallet on the corpse, but a business card in one of his pockets identified him as Michael McMorrow, a 44-year-old real estate agent who lived with his elderly mother in Manhattan and had a history of struggling with substance abuse. Michael McMorrow, who was known in his neighborhood by the nickname Irish, was by all accounts a friendly drunk without an enemy in the world. And much like Daphne, he'd done stints in rehab and Alcoholics Anonymous, and in fact, he attended the same AA meetings that Daphne had. With it being abundantly clear that a crime had occurred, the case fell to NYPD detective Rob Mooney. By the time Michael had been identified and connected to Daphne, Christopher had already been arrested, and a little after noon the next day, the NYPD arrested Daphne as well. And this is when the media circus begins. In many ways, the Central Park slang, as it has become known, was tailor-made for the media environment of 1997. It had teenage killers, blood and guts, a glamorous young heiress, and a kid with a Spanish surname who had allegedly gone crazy with a knife. Everything that the New York tabloids and local TV lived for in the late 1990s. Almost immediately, people began asking questions. How could 2 kids, not even old enough to drive, have managed to kill a full-grown adult? And more importantly, why? That question, why, would haunt the case for decades to come, and with some arguing that it continues to this day. But in the moment, people settled on a speculation that seemed to be backed up by the very few facts everyone knew. Michael McMorrow had been nearly 30 years older than his killer, or killers. What was a guy in his 40s doing drinking with teenagers in Central Park in the middle of the night? The only explanation that most New Yorkers could come up with were more than just a little sinister. Perhaps Michael's killing had been some kind of self-defense. Michael's family vehemently denied this, however. And for what it's worth, there are no documented reports of Michael McMorrow behaving inappropriately towards children. There weren't any in 1997, and none have emerged since he died. While Michael McMorrow's body was on its way to an autopsy, the NYPD searched both Daphne and Christopher's bedrooms. In Christopher's room, they found clothing and a knife with blood on them. Investigators took the items for DNA analysis. At the Majestic, they found blood on Daphne's clothing, her wristwatch, and the rollerblades that she wore to the park nearly every day. They also found Michael's missing wallet in a drawer in Daphne's room. Both suspects asked for lawyers immediately after they were arrested, so Mooney was unable to interrogate either of them about this new evidence. He was, however, able to talk to witnesses. Daphne, Christopher, and Michael were all well-known regulars at Central Park. Daphne had been playing in the park since she was a toddler, and both teens were often seen rollerblading through the area. As alcohol became a bigger and bigger part of their lives, the pair were often seen drinking with friends in the same meadow where Daphne had once played. Daphne was known for picking fights with random adults and expecting her friends to back her up. Christopher was described as being very much under Daphne's control, willing to go along with whatever she wanted him to do as long as she stayed happy. And the crazy thing is, one day before this crime occurred on the 22nd of May was the day that Christopher and Daphne officially became boyfriend and girlfriend. There were also reports from the day of the crime that Daphne had been in a particularly violent mood that day, boasting to her friends, "I'm gonna kill somebody tonight." For his part, Michael was easy to read, as simply a local drunk. He had struggled for years to control his alcohol consumption, attending rehab and AA with mixed results. But when he was drinking, he didn't seem to be very interested in causing problems for anyone else. Most of the time, he was happy enough to just sit by the lake and enjoy the scenery. The detectives were mostly stumped at the vicious nature of the crime, trying to figure out what could have pushed someone to do something so terrible. When the results of Michael's autopsy arrived, they were very much a mixed bag. Some details were to be expected, such as the tight grouping of the stab wounds in his chest. That type of grouping suggested that he had been lying down and not moving at the time those blows had been delivered, meaning that someone had time to aim. Others were surprising, but not shocking. Michael's blood alcohol content was 0.31, 3 times over the legal limit for driving in New York State. He was pretty drunk when he died, but not so drunk that he would have lost consciousness. He would have been able to walk on his own, or at least before the attack started. But perhaps the most intriguing detail to me was a collection of strange bruises on the backs of Michael's legs. The medical examiner identified the injuries as pattern bruises inflicted by the impacts of something with a regular pattern, probably a mass-produced object. And if you're having trouble visualizing this, think of the tread pattern on the bottom of your shoes. Even if the treads don't form a perfectly square grid, they do follow clear lines that look deliberate and man-made. If you saw the print of a running shoe in the mud, you wouldn't mistake it for a dog's print or the imprint from a falling rock. And you could probably match the track of that particular running shoe to other shoes of the same model by isolating the pattern. That is more or less how pattern bruises work. But the pattern bruises on Michael didn't look like marks made by a running shoe. Within a week of the arrest, New York's DA office had filed indictments against both Daphne Abdallah and Christopher Vasquez, charging them both with second-degree murder. Both teens hired lawyers immediately. Christopher retained Arnold Chris, a former assistant district attorney who was considered a formidable opponent in the courtroom. Daphne, or perhaps her parents, chose to go with someone a little more high profile. Benjamin Brathman, a lawyer known for representing clients, including both mobsters and celebrities. When the results of the DNA testing arrived, they showed that the knife found in Christopher's room had traces of blood on both the blade and the hilt. The blood came from 2 different people, Christopher Vasquez and Michael McMorrow. The cops had found their murder weapon, or at least one of the murder weapons. The case against Christopher was looking pretty solid. The case against Daphne, however, not so much. Which is why Detective Mooney thought he hit the jackpot when he got a call from Ben Brofman offering to make a deal. Brofman said that his client, Daphne, was a witness and not a perpetrator, and that she was willing to talk to the police under what's known as a Queen for a Day agreement. The rules of Queen for a Day are simple. A suspect can tell the police anything they like without having to worry about anything they say being used against them in court. prosecutors are expressly forbidden from using Queen for a Day testimony against the defendants, who offer it unless that testimony contradicts something those same defendants say on the witness stand. Most competent lawyers will do whatever they can to ensure that their clients don't testify, so it's rare for Queen for a Day cases to end up with any court testimony to contradict them. Police and prosecutors both love Queen for a Day arrangements because they are a way to get inside information on a case, often including details that can be used against other suspects. Defense lawyers sometimes approve them when they offer the opportunity to get the police off a client's back entirely. These agreements are very popular in mob cases, so it's not really a surprise that Ben Brofman would offer one. And at this point, Detective Mooney was very interested in what Daphne Abdallah had to say. At the interview, Daphne told a very different story from the one that she recounted in her apartment kitchen at the Majestic. She described how she and Christopher had been drinking beer at the park with friends, including Michael McMorrow. They'd gotten loud enough after dark that a cop patrolling the park showed up to break up the party, and various drinkers had left in all different directions. Daphne and Christopher had snatched up the remaining booze and headed for the gazebo by the lake. And Michael? Well, in the words of Detective Mooney, Michael simply followed the beer. Daphne explained that she and Christopher had stripped off their clothes to go skinny dipping in the lake. If you've ever been in Central Park in late May, you know that the warmer spring weather doesn't necessarily translate to warm water, so it was a very cold swim. When they climbed out, Daphne said that she was shivering, and Michael put his arm around her in an attempt to warm her up. According to her, that was when Christopher snapped. Furious that another man had dared to make a move on his girlfriend, he pulled a knife and stabbed Michael a number of times. From there, her second story mostly matched with the first one. Christopher had done all the stabbing, and she'd merely tried to help him hide the body by weighing it down with rocks. Detective Mooney had a number of follow-up questions, but only one of them really mattered. He pulled out one of Michael's autopsy photos and asked Daphne if she had any idea what could have caused that strange pattern of bruising on the victim's legs. Daphne said she didn't know, which was when Mooney pulled Daphne's rollerblades out of a box and set them on the table. The wheels on those skates matched the pattern of the bruises perfectly. At this point, Daphne began to quickly crack. She admitted that she had kicked Michael to knock him down, but continued to insist that only Christopher had used the knife. And if you are wondering how she explained kicking Michael with rollerblades on when she was supposedly soaking wet and naked, then keep wondering, because that information does not seem to have made it into her testimony. In March of 1998, Daphne Abdallah took a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to first-degree manslaughter and was sentenced to 3 to 9 years in state prison. Christopher was less fortunate. His case went to trial, and prosecutors were able to use Daphne's testimony against him along with the physical evidence of the blood on the knife. His defense strategy was mostly to claim that no one could really know what had happened in the gazebo that night, and occasionally to hint that maybe Daphne had killed Michael. The jury took just 2 days to declare him not guilty of second-degree murder, but guilty of first-degree manslaughter. The jurors were actually seen crying as they re-entered the courtroom. Daphne Abdallah and Christopher Vasquez served their sentence in separate facilities and were released a day apart in 2004. A condition of their parole was that they weren't allowed to see each other again. Daphne soon violated her parole and was sent back to prison for another 3 years. But Christopher seems to have kept his record clean since the day he walked out of prison. Both of them have refused to speak to the media, other than Christopher asking to be left alone after a documentary dropped an episode on the case in 2024, which is actually how I discovered this case to begin with. Perhaps the most frustrating piece of this case is the lack of a motive. Why would 2 teenagers stab a man to death in a gazebo and then pull out his intestines? In the absence of a clear answer, books and podcasts and YouTube videos tend to insert their own motives. Perhaps Michael was feeling Daphne up after all, for the first and only time in his life. Perhaps Daphne was an angry, confused, spoiled, bratty rich girl who wanted to take a human life simply for the thrill of it. Perhaps Christopher's hidden rage ran deeper than anyone suspected, and all it took was one bad night to set him off. Maybe it was the alcohol. Maybe it was mental illness. Or who knows? Maybe it was just a full moon. The point is, everyone has a story with this case, and no one can seemingly prove everything. But for my money, the scariest part of the death of Michael McMorrow is just this. We'll probably never know exactly what happened, or exactly why Daphne and Christopher did what they did. Sometimes horrific things happen, and there's never an explanation. Sometimes you don't get to know why. And that's the scariest ending of all. Los Angeles has given the world a surprising number of innovations over its 3 centuries in existence. The region is home to everything, from Barbie dolls and electric guitars to the first space shuttle and the first message ever sent over the internet. But perhaps LA's darkest claim to fame is its showcasing of freeway dramas. From standoffs to hostage situations to both high and low speed chases that usually end with devastating results. Most people know about the O.J. Simpson chase in 1994 and the infamous footage caught by news helicopters above. By the time the white Bronco had hit the 405 freeway, TV station helicopters were airing it live for the world to see. Then there was Daniel Jones, an HIV-positive man who, in 1998, had an hour-long standoff with police on a major highway before he displayed a banner complaining about HMOs and then, sadly, taking his own life. What makes it even worse was that all of this was aired live on after-school TV to an audience of thousands of children. Honestly, after that, the guy in San Diego who stole a tank and drove it onto the highway barely even registers. The gruesome golden age of the highway drama was probably the 1990s and early 2000s, but the people of Los Angeles still prick up their ears when they hear about chaos erupting on a nearby interstate. So, when the word went out in April of 2024 that something was happening on the 405 freeway, people mostly expected some kind of ridiculous public spectacle. What they got was much darker. On the morning of Thursday, April 8th, 2024, Sharonda Cole got a phone call from the Los Angeles County Medical Examiner's office, informing her that her daughter was dead. Sharonda's daughter, 34-year-old Danielle Johnson, had driven her black Porsche Cayenne SUV into a tree at more than 100 miles per hour on the Pacific Coast Highway in Redondo Beach, California, a small community on Santa Monica Bay just south of Los Angeles. And the news, unfortunately, got much worse from there. When police entered Danielle's apartment in Woodland Hills, north of the city, they found the body of 29-year-old Jalen Chaney, Danielle's partner and the father of her youngest child. He'd been stabbed to death and his body was dragged from the living room to the kitchen, apparently in an attempt to dispose of it. At around 4:30 in the morning, Danielle's 2 daughters, a 9-year-old and an 8-month-old named Soli, jumped or were thrown from a black Porsche Cayenne on the 405 freeway in Culver City, not far from the apartment. The 9-year-old fell with the infant in her arms. She survived the impact with the pavement, dodged the fast-moving early morning traffic, and managed to make it to the side of the highway. where she flagged down a car to help. Her little sister, unfortunately, was not so lucky, as she died at the scene. In the aftermath of the tragedy, pretty much everyone asked every possible question. But one question no one seemed to know the answer to was why. Everyone seemed to have explanations, but none of them really made any sense. The LAPD announced that they had found tarot cards and black feathers in the apartment, suggesting that Danielle Johnson, who went by the name Ayoka online, was influenced by her beliefs in astrology and the occult to do what she did. Something that wasn't too far of a stretch, given that Danielle made her living as an online astrologer. Other sources, including the LA Times, blamed the solar eclipse that happened just a few hours after Danielle died, or at least Danielle's opinions about the eclipse. And it is worth noting that Danielle had apparently been obsessed with the impending eclipse, tweeting about it frequently in ominous terms. In Danielle's words, the eclipse was the epitome of spiritual warfare, and her followers needed to choose a side. It wasn't clear what she meant by that. Under normal circumstances, I don't think there are really sides to the moon briefly blocking out sunlight from reaching part of the Earth. But then again, I'm not an astronomer, or an astrologer for that matter. Then again, it could have just been about anything else Danielle was tweeting about in the last few weeks of her life. A list that includes demons, the eclipse, a fake speech by American founding father Benjamin Franklin, a conspiracy theory about Jewish people promoting pedophiles in the entertainment industry, and QAnon. A few of Danielle's online followers speculated that she could have been suffering from postpartum psychosis, a rare condition that occurs in 1 to 2 out of every 1,000 births. But the problem is the timeline doesn't line up there. Sully was about 8 months old when she died, and the onset of postpartum psychosis usually happens within 2 to 4 weeks after giving birth. Because postpartum psychosis has such dramatic symptoms as slurred or incoherent speech, manic behavior, and catatonia, people usually notice it before the 8-month mark. It seems that the answer to why Danielle Johnson did what she did probably lies farther back. Danielle was born in Maryland in 1989. From an early age, Danielle showed symptoms of severe anxiety. According to her mother, if Danielle had a headache, she would assume that it was actually an aneurysm that was going to kill her. Her chaotic home environment probably didn't help either. Sharonda struggled with drug addiction, and Danielle's father was never a part of her life. Danielle later claimed that she had her first near-death experience at 3 years old, and that her psychic visions and her interest in shamanism began there. When Danielle was 13, her mother's substance abuse became so unmanageable that she sent Danielle to live with Sharonda's brother, a married Navy veteran living in Virginia. Danielle later described this action as being abandoned by her one and only parent. Danielle graduated high school in 2007 and then attended the University of Norfolk, where she studied psychology and became involved with a Baptist church and a Bible study group. One of her housemates, a woman named Maya, later told Rolling Stone that Danielle often talked about having visions and prophetic dreams. Maybe that sounds like it should have been a red flag, but in a deeply religious community, there's a tradition of people claiming to receive prophecy in the name of God, so nobody seems to have thought Danielle was all that unusual. Even so, she left the church in early adulthood for unknown reasons. In her junior year of college, Danielle dropped out and moved back in with her aunt and uncle in Virginia. She developed an interest in Reiki, a practice of alternative medicine that originated in Japan. Reiki's practitioners described it as a form of energy healing, transferring a kind of universal life force through the practitioner's hands to physically and psychologically heal a patient. Depending on who you ask, Reiki is either a powerful and deeply meaningful spiritual practice, or it's a form of pseudoscience. At this point, I'm going to pause the section here and deliver something of a public service announcement before my comment section bursts into flames. I don't normally feel the need to do this. People who watch my videos generally seem like a pretty level-headed group, but some of the content in this story seems very likely to bring out the less level-headed commenter. As you've probably noticed, Danielle Johnson believed in a lot of things that aren't exactly mainstream, and also a lot of things that are perhaps more mainstream than more people realize. Because this is the internet, there will definitely be some people down in the comments who are offended that I'm not condemning every single one of these beliefs. There's also going to be people who are offended that I'm not agreeing with all of them. And even more people who have cherry-picked which of Danielle's beliefs they want me to endorse, and which ones they want me to describe as superstitious, or pseudoscience, or demonic, or whatever. None of these groups of people are going to agree with any of the others. And usually, I don't weigh in on these arguments because this is YouTube. People have been fighting in the comment section on every YouTube video since the dawn of time. But just this once, I'm going to ask everyone for a favor. Remember that this story isn't really about Danielle Johnson. Granted, I'm spending a lot of time talking about her, and I'm going to keep doing that. But this story is about a bizarre series of events that led to the deaths of 3 people. One of them being too young to have any kind of choice, say, or basic understanding of what was happening to her. As I was writing this script, I did my best to keep that fact in mind, so I'm asking you to do the same. Please do not use the death of an 8-month-old baby to justify attacking other people, especially over their religious beliefs. It's bad enough that these events happened. Nobody needs you to make them worse. Thank you for your patience. Now I'm going back to the story. In 2012, Danielle met a man named Cecil Rice on Twitter. He worked for Procter & Gamble and wasn't really a part of the alternative spiritual community that Danielle was building around herself. But he thought she was funny and she thought he was cute, and the two of them clicked almost instantly. They got married and moved to Ohio in 2014, and their daughter was born the following year. 2015 was also the year that Danielle Johnson blew up. Under the Twitter handle Mystic Lipstick, she made the shift from offering long-distance energy healing to presenting herself as an expert in astrology. This was when astrology Twitter was really coming into its own, and Danielle quickly established her own unique brand. Mystic Lipstick combined a brash, tell-it-like-it-is attitude with a perspective on mysticism that focused on self-healing. She would say things like, "I love Geminis for their exuberance and spontaneity. Hanging with a Gemini can really make you forget that you have adulting to do." It was exactly what astrology Twitter was looking for. Maybe a little too much of what it was looking for. As Danielle was being interviewed for books and appearing on podcasts, other online astrologers pointed out that it wasn't very long ago that she'd been asking them for advice and insight on the basics of the practice. They also pointed out that some of what Danielle was saying didn't make much sense on what other astrologers believed. As astrologer Amy Tripp put it, she said things just to say things. But whatever Danielle was doing, it was working for her. On her personal website, she offered weekly aura cleanses for $2.99, $1.99 for anyone who was a member of the site. Home cleanses were $6.99, $11.99 would buy spiritual cleanses for specific astrological signs. She also offered a 5-month course on spiritual healing, costing $150 per month. And as the money started rolling in, Danielle would buy luxury handbags and lease high-end cars. In 2018, she separated from Cecil Rice. Although they never officially divorced, according to Rice, they had grown apart and wanted different things out of life. Danielle moved to New York and took sole custody of her daughter. She moved into an apartment in Tribeca with a new partner, to whom she soon became engaged. While in New York, she began pursuing her lifelong passion for music, even releasing an album titled Venus under the name Ayoka. But it didn't do well, and she pivoted back to promoting herself as a spiritual healer. In 2020, Danielle and her fiancé moved to Los Angeles, where they lived with her mother and her son. That's when Danielle's social media presence began turning into something darker. She began telling her mother and her real-life friends that she was dabbling in witchcraft, placing curses and hexes on people who said mean things about her online. Something that was corroborated after she died, when 2 TikTokers claimed that Danielle had put a curse on another astrologer using a picture of that person, 9 nails, and the tongue of a dead cow. Late 2020 was also when Danielle first came into contact with Jalen Chaney. Jalen was an armament technician with the 31st Munition Squadron of the U.S. Air Force stationed in Italy, and he was deeply interested in the spiritual world. According to people who knew him, he was a born dreamer with a sunny personality and an easy way with other people. He loved dancing to EDM music and watching YouTube videos of tornadoes. He was a massive Star Wars fan who used a photo of himself in a Boba Fett helmet as his profile picture on dating sites. And prior to meeting Danielle, most of his serious romantic relationships had been with men. It's not clear why Jalen began DMing with Danielle, but by the time their communications began, he was calling himself a Reiki master in his Twitter bio. In 2021, he registered a website where he offered aura baths and something called timeline shifts. According to Sharonda, Danielle became obsessed with Jalen almost immediately. She described him as her twin flame or her soulmate. She performed spells and rituals to promote their relationship and did her best to convince him that he wasn't actually gay and that he was meant to be with her. Even though Danielle identified as bisexual, she was constantly critical of Jalen's sexuality. She would monitor everything he said and everything that he did, often verbally attacking him if he made comments about other men. She locked down his Twitter account to prevent others from putting curses or spells on it. She also accused Jalen's own mother of performing black magic rituals to keep them apart. It got so bad that in the spring of 2022, Sharonda privately reached out to Jalen and urged him to end the relationship. Danielle responded by kicking Sharonda out of the house. Sharonda would never get the chance to speak with her daughter again. In the summer of 2022, Jalen moved in with Danielle. Sully was born in late 2023, and by the spring of 2024, Danielle had successfully distanced herself from almost everyone who cared about her. She hadn't been in contact with her mother for over a year, and most of the friends and colleagues who would later be interviewed about her had little to do with her in the last few months of her life. Cecil Rice spoke to her occasionally and would later say that he didn't notice anything was amiss. However, he was surprised to hear from her in February of 2024 that she was finally thinking about officially ending their marriage so that she could marry Jalen. Cecil hadn't realized that the relationship had gotten that serious. And while things may have seemed to be going well for Danielle on the outside, on the inside, Danielle was falling apart on social media. In March of 2024, she posted a picture of a candle surrounded by leaves, saying that it was a way to protect your mind and body from the eclipse. She told her followers to like the image to activate its powers for themselves. Her other posts were full of wild claims about child abuse and anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. And things seemed to continue like this until early April, where everything finally seemed to boil over. The only surviving witness to the bloody events of April 7th and 8th of 2024 was 9 years old. There are some details that we are never going to know, but based on statements by police and the best available evidence, here is more or less what happened. Sometime on the evening of April 7th or the morning of April 8th, Danielle stabbed Jalen to death while he was lying on the couch in their apartment. She tried to drag his body outside, presumably to hide it, but only made it as far as the kitchen before giving up and changing tactics. Leaving bloody footprints in the hallway, Danielle grabbed her kids and was seen limping to her car. Danielle got both of her kids into the SUV and peeled out of the complex. driving her vehicle through a gate as she took off. Around 4:30 a.m., Danielle was more than 20 miles away from her apartment, driving the SUV at high speeds down Interstate 405 in Culver City. It's not clear what happened inside of the vehicle, but somewhere near the exit for Howard Hughes Parkway, the door opened and her oldest daughter jumped or was thrown onto the highway with her arms wrapped around her baby sister. And sadly, only one child made it to the shoulder of the highway, alive. Half an hour later, and about 15 miles south, the SUV slammed into a tree alongside the Pacific Coast Highway. Danielle Johnson suffered massive injuries on impact and died almost instantly. In the aftermath, the few remaining people who cared about Danielle and Jalen struggled to pick up the pieces and make sense of what they had found. Jalen's mother started a GoFundMe to pay for Jalen's funeral expenses. Sharonda visited the apartment in Woodland Hills and found that her normally tidy daughter had left behind bags of trash that hadn't been taken out and a sink full of rotting food and dirty dishes. Cecil Rice took his daughter home to Ohio, where she has thankfully recovered from her injuries and has began to see a therapist. The shock of the deaths ripped through the Mystic Lipstick fandom like an earthquake. Hundreds of them joined a Twitter space hosted by Sharonda 4 days afterwards, weeping and asking the same questions everyone else was. But even then, they seemed to be making their own kind of sense of what had happened. One of them claimed that Danielle had contacted him from beyond the grave and explained why she killed Jalen and Sully. Others simply grieved. And the twisted irony of all of this is that the LA Times printed its coverage of the story right next to a retrospective on the O.J. Simpson chase. If you've spent any time consuming true crime media, whether it's books, podcasts, or YouTube videos, you'll know one of the oldest jokes in the community. The husband did it. It's a pretty obvious jab at the fact that in a lot of high-profile true crime stories, women are the victims, and the men in their lives are the ones who made them that way. And while no rule of thumb is 100% true 100% of the time, the numbers on real crimes back this up. According to the U.S. Bureau of Justice, in 2021, out of the 4,970 female murders with an identified perpetrator, 76% were killed by someone known to the victim. Of those, half were killed by an intimate partner. For comparison, a lot more males were murdered in 2021. But only 6% of them are known to have died at the hands of an intimate partner. If a woman dies by homicide, it's more likely than not that the person who committed the homicide is someone that she knew. A spouse, a parent, a friend, someone in her life to whom she was close. The closer the relationship, the more likely the suspect. So it should come as no surprise that when a young woman is found dead in her own home, the first question that police often ask is, where's her partner? These are all reasonable assumptions, but you know what they say happens when we assume. This is a story about what happens when the reasonable assumptions are wrong, when the husband didn't do it, and when the consequences of not believing the most likely suspect are worse than anyone could imagine. Heather Kwan was a student at Arizona State University who was planning to attend law school. She was also living with her boyfriend, Ryan Waller. The couple had been together for about 8 months, and they shared the home with a roommate named Alicia. On Christmas Day in 2006, Ryan's parents were surprised when the couple didn't appear at their home for Christmas dinner as expected. They didn't call that night, or even the day after to let everyone know that they were okay. It seemed out of character to the Wallers, so Ryan's father, Don, headed over to the house, where he discovered that no one was answering the door. Since he was already the kind of dad who would drive over just to check on his son who hadn't called, Ryan's father began peering in the windows of the house to see if he could make out any movement inside. He didn't see movement, but he did see a body on the couch in the living room. A body that didn't look like it was breathing. The police were called to the house, but for some reason they decided not to break down the door. Instead, they waited for a search warrant. If you are watching this from outside of the United States or just don't have a clear idea on how American policing works, there's an amendment to the US Constitution that protects citizens from unreasonable search and seizure. Most courts interpret this to mean that the cops can't search you or break into your house without getting a warrant from a judge. There is, however, an exception to this rule known as probable cause. Without getting too technical, it means that the cops can usually search you or your home without getting in legal trouble if they have good reason to believe that something illegal is happening. You would think that a dead body on the couch would qualify as probable cause, but I am not a lawyer. In any case, while the police were waiting for their warrant, Alicia got home after spending part of her holiday outside of the house. She apparently didn't notice the police or Ryan's father, nor did they seem to notice her, and Alicia also didn't seem to notice anything unusual inside of the house. She went straight to her bedroom, presumably minding her own business. At some point after Alicia came home, the cops decided to try knocking on the door again. This time, Alicia answered. With her permission to enter, nobody needed a warrant, and the police went into the house and discovered an absolute horror show. The body of Heather Kwan was found laying on the living room couch, dead from a gunshot wound to the head. Ryan was alive and moving around, but he had blood on his face and a gigantic bruise covering his left eye. The police took Ryan into custody and stashed him in the back of a squad car while they processed the scene. No one seems to have any clear idea of what Ryan might have said to the cops at the house that day. Phoenix PD has not exactly been forthcoming, probably for reasons that will become very clear soon. But again, there's that reasonable assumption the husband, or in this case the boyfriend, did it. If a woman dies by homicide, it was probably the work of someone that she knew. And as far as anyone could tell, on December 26th, Ryan had been the only other person in that house. The police kept Ryan in the back of the car for 4 hours while they were investigating the scene. There aren't any public records of anything he said or did during this time. But at around 5 a.m. on the morning of December 27th, Ryan entered an interrogation room at Phoenix Police Station wearing a white jumpsuit. Again, it's not exactly clear why, but it's likely that the police took his clothes for forensic examination. And his 6-hour-long interrogation was about to begin.
Okay, actually, we now want your feet on the table. I'm going to take pictures of bottom of your feet for me. Lift up your feet. Pull up the slots. Is that good enough for you, Paul? That'd be fine. Okay, lift them up a little bit. There you go. So I'm going to read you something to make sure you understand your rights, okay? Basically, I'm going to read you. You've seen Cops before, right? Ever seen a TV show Cops or CSI or anything like that?
Okay.
You ever seen that?
No.
You've never seen any kind of cop show? Lawyer show? Any kind of show?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll let you listen up real close. Okay, you have the right to remain silent. You don't know what?
I don't know. I just want to go home.
Oh, you're not going to go home right now.
So what?
What's the highest grade that you completed?
B?
No. Not grade as in letter grade. I'm asking, did you graduate high school?
No.
And the highest you went was 8th grade?
Yep.
Do you know how to read and write, Ryan?
Yeah.
Do you have a girlfriend? No? You know a girl named Heather?
Mm-hmm.
You know Heather's last name?
Mm-hmm.
What is Heather's last name?
The one that lives there right now?
I guess, I don't know. If her name's Heather, what's her last name?
I don't know which name she's trying to use as her last one. She's trying to have a real last as her nickname, so I don't know.
What happened to your face?
I don't know.
You told the officer just a few minutes ago that someone hit you. Do you remember who hit you?
I don't know. I think it was Heather.
Why would Heather hit you?
I don't know. It was an accident. I forgot why.
What was an accident?
Heather's last name?
No. What was an accident?
Heather hitting me.
What did she hit you with?
Her hand in the eye.
Did you guys have an argument?
Not really, no.
Not really? What, did you know Alicia? You don't know Alicia? She lives at your house? You know a guy named Eric? What's Eric's last name?
He's trying to pay me back. Green something.
His last name is Green something? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Where's Eric right now?
I don't know.
Do you have his phone number?
I really don't. He doesn't have one.
Okay. Do you have Heather's phone number? You don't know?
Mm-mm.
How about Christina?
Mm-mm.
You don't have anybody's phone number?
Mm-mm.
What happened last night?
I don't know.
You don't know?
I really don't. I just want to go to sleep and go to sleep. Oh.
Detective Paul Dalton was the lead investigator on the case at this point. He tried to establish a rapport with Ryan, asking him if he'd ever seen a cop or lawyer show so he'd know what to expect. Ryan's answer was very strange, however. I don't know. It was the first of many bizarre replies. Ryan was not what you'd call a cooperative suspect. The police asked him what had happened, and he said that he didn't know. They asked him why did he kill Heather, but Ryan seemed shocked to learn that Heather was dead. They asked him what had happened to his face, and once again, Ryan said he didn't know. The video on screen shows Ryan fidgeting and shifting around in his seat, moaning as if he's in pain. But the cops ignore it and go on questioning him as he begins slurring his words and becoming even more confused. At some point, Ryan mentioned someone named Christina. The cops couldn't find any mention of Christina in their paperwork, and they went around in circles with Ryan for a while before establishing that Christina had helped Heather with her hair at some point. He mentioned someone named Richie, and then Richie and his dad. Later on, he said that Richie and his dad had came over on Christmas night and shot Ryan and Heather with arrows. Then Ryan changed his story and said that it was actually with revolvers. At this point, it was early on the morning of Friday the 27th of December, and Heather had been dead for more than 24 hours. And that is when Detective Dalton decided to actually look at Ryan's wounds. He finally decided that, yeah, maybe this kid did need to go to the hospital, and arranged for him to be transported there. At the hospital, doctors discovered that Ryan Waller had been shot in the head. The bullet had splintered on impact, and a chunk of it had lodged behind his left eye. There were bone fragments in his left temporal lobe along with the rest of the bullet, and because so much time had passed between when he was shot and when he was actually receiving medical treatment, he developed an infection in his brain. Between the infection and the swelling, doctors had to delay surgery to remove the bullet. Ryan would ultimately lose his left eye and a part of his brain. He would spend 35 days in the hospital and would later suffer debilitating seizures for the rest of his life. Oh, and he also had a broken jaw from being tackled during his arrest. There's no formal statement from Phoenix PD on how that one happened, so I suppose you're just going to have to use your imagination. Between Ryan's garbled statement about someone else shooting him, the fact that there was no evidence that Heather had touched a gun, and the fact that no one who actually knew the couple seemed to think domestic violence was a possibility, the police were forced to actually look at a second suspect. Yes, Ryan had given conflicting statements in the interrogation room, and no, nobody had gotten shot with any arrows. But Ryan did have a head injury, so maybe he wasn't lying so much as extremely confused. The fact that an 18-year-old American man in 2006 didn't know whether he'd ever seen a cop show might have been a clue there. Some of my viewers may not remember that year, but I was there, and network TV in 2006 was at least 30% cop shows by volume. There were 4 different Law & Order series airing that year alone. It took a lot more investigation, but eventually the facts came out, or at least most of them did. The events that I'm about to describe happened either on the evening of December 25th or on the morning of December 26th. The Waller family claims the earlier time, probably because Heather and Ryan missed Christmas dinner. The police claim the later time, possibly because that makes it seem like they got Ryan to the hospital a little sooner after his injury. There are also accounts from lawyers that claim that these events happened on December 23rd, though no one seems to want to try to explain how Ryan made it all the way to the 26th without any kind of medical attention after being shot in the head and was still mobile enough to be tackled by police. There are a lot of conflicting accounts of what happened in this story, as you are about to see, but either way, at some point that night, there was a knock at the door while Ryan and Heather were sitting on the couch watching TV. Ryan got up to answer the knock, and on the other side of that door was Richie Carver, a former resident of that house who had moved out earlier that month, and his father, Larry Carver. Right after the murder, there were rumors that Richie had some kind of vendetta against Ryan, but as far as anyone has been able to prove, the two men barely knew each other. Richie Carver was a genuine piece of shit. By the night of Heather's murder, he had done 4 years in prison for armed robbery, and his criminal record included charges of assault and domestic violence. Richie and Larry's reasons for being there are unclear still to this day. An article in the Arizona Daily Independent claimed that they were seeking revenge for a presumed altercation, but nobody online seems to have any information about what the altercation was or whether it even really happened. Other theories floating around are that Richie had made advances towards Heather at some point and wanted to either follow up or get back at her somehow. If any of this seems confusing to you, I really can't overstate just how much of this case is full of unreliable narrators. A document filed by Richie's lawyers say that he wanted to pick up some belongings that he had left at the house, and also to investigate a rumor that Ryan had pistol whipped Richie and possibly someone else. But whatever happened in that doorway, Ryan decided he wanted none of it and tried to close the door on both Richie and Larry. At that point, someone, the police and Richie's lawyer say it was Richie, stuck his arms through the gap and shot Ryan in the face. Ryan fell to the floor and Richie stepped in after him and shot him in the head a second time, causing Ryan to lose consciousness. The two men then entered the house, and one of them, the police say that this time it was Larry, shot Heather, presumably because she was a witness. After that, Richie and Larry left the house. And amazingly, this is where things get really complicated. Larry and Richie fled to the house of Cheryl Carver, Larry's wife and Richie's mother. According to a statement Cheryl later made to police, Larry told her, "I've just fucked up. I killed 2 people and I've got to get out of here." Larry asked her to gather up the .22 caliber ammunition that was kept in a desk drawer in Cheryl's house and get rid of it. According to Cheryl, Larry then left the house almost immediately to head to California, taking the murder weapon with him. Richie Carver was arrested and charged with burglary, aggravated assault, first-degree murder, theft, and possessing a weapon as a convicted felon. After Richie was arrested, Cheryl contacted the Phoenix Police Department. She told them about what Larry had said to her on the night of Heather's murder, and that he'd left the state with a gun. At trial, Richie's mother and sister claimed that he'd been at home in bed at the time of the shootings, and his defense team claimed that Heather had an ex-boyfriend named Bozy who made a threat to Ryan and was a much better suspect. But pretty much nobody took this seriously though, presumably because Ryan was alive and had identified Richie as the person who shot him. When Cheryl was asked about her statements to police, she claimed that she didn't remember any of them and refused to repeat anything that she'd said. The detectives that she'd spoken to were actually the ones to testify instead of Cheryl. In June of 2008, Richie was convicted on every charge except theft, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And that just left Larry, who had been arrested the year prior in February of 2007. And remember earlier when I told you that all of this was going to be complicated? Well, in American law, there is something called spousal privilege. It's a rule that says people can't be forced to testify against their spouse in criminal cases about events that happened during their marriage. There are very few categories of people who can't be made to testify in court. And most of these exceptions are people like therapists or the defendant's own lawyers. After Larry's arrest, Cheryl insisted that she couldn't be made to testify against him because they were married at the time of the shooting. The fact that she'd already given a statement to police incriminating Larry made the situation something of a legal nightmare. Cheryl later claimed that the only reason she made those statements was because at the time her marriage to Larry had been on the rocks and she wanted to get a divorce. Without Cheryl's testimony, though, Larry was acquitted at trial. And that is finally when the Kwan family got involved. Outraged that the man they believed had killed their daughter was walking free, they lobbied the Arizona State Legislature to change the laws around spousal privileges. The legislature passed what came to be known as Heather's Law, which dictates that a person can be compelled to testify against their spouse if they've already made a voluntary statement to police. Larry went to court to argue that the law couldn't be forced against him since the shooting happened before the law was passed. But a court overruled him and Cheryl's testimony was ruled admissible. Larry Carver was convicted of Heather's murder in 2012. In 2013, he was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Ryan Waller moved back in with his parents after he was discharged from the hospital, but his injuries made it far too difficult for him to ever function on his own. The Waller family took the Phoenix Police Department to court, suing them for $15 million in damages because of their refusal to examine Ryan's wounds or get him medical treatment in a timely manner. The case was dismissed after an expert testified that getting Ryan to the hospital earlier wouldn't have made a difference to his injuries. There are rumblings that the Wallers want to refile the case, but so far nothing official has happened. Ryan Waller died of complications from his injuries in January of 2006. He was 27 years old. The thing about this case, and I'm going off script here again in this video, something I've noticed is that some villains are very obvious. None of the horror in this story would have even happened if Richie and Larry Carver hadn't walked up to the door of that house on that cold December night. But sometimes the worst things that happen to us aren't a result of malice. Apathy and incompetence will do the job just as well. After all, the husband did it. Right?
Years ago, a 29-year-old woman was executed while setting up a garage sale at her home in Tomball, and tonight still, the killer's identity remains a mystery.
We don't know who did this. We believe it's somebody that knew her, but we're clueless, and it's hard to trust.
What do you do with your weekends? Maybe you play in a recreational sports league. Maybe you volunteer with a charity or attend a religious service. Maybe you lie on the couch and binge YouTube. Well, if you are Elizabeth Barraza and her husband Sergio, you do something a little more elaborate. Or, in Liz's case, you did. Liz was a big fan of Harry Potter and Star Wars, and on many weekends she could be found in full cosplay. Liz and Sergio were members of the 501st Stormtrooper Legion, a kind of Star Wars fan club for a very specific kind of cosplayer. The members of the 501st build and wear highly detailed, screen-accurate costumes belonging to villainous characters in the Star Wars universe. Originally, the Legion focused on people making and wearing their own Stormtrooper armor, but over time it expanded to include people dressing up as other kinds of Imperial soldiers, Sith Lords, and other villains. Despite their bad guy aesthetic, the 501st is well known as a charitable organization, often organizing visits to children's hospitals and other charity events. If you need someone to raise money for your charity drive by letting random strangers pay to shoot space villains with Nerf guns, the 501st is your first call. They describe themselves as bad guys doing good. Liz's serial number with the 501st was TB93474, meaning that she played a biker scout, one of the soldiers on the flying speeder bikes from the Return of the Jedi. If you look her up online today, you'll find photos of her in several different costumes, and at least one image of her and Sergio kissing in the background while their helmets sit side by side in the foreground. Liz and Sergio met while they were students at Sam Houston State University in Huntsville, Texas. They adopted a dachshund puppy named Diesel while they were in college, and they got married on February 1st of 2014. By early 2019, Sergio was working at his father's business installing flooring, while Liz worked as a data reporter for the Rosen Group, an engineering firm that works with energy companies in and around Houston, Texas. The couple was preparing to celebrate their 5th wedding anniversary with a trip to Orlando, Florida to visit Disney World and Universal Studios. Liz had already packed her Gryffindor suitcase and just had a few loose ends to tie up before they left. One of those loose ends was hosting a garage sale on Friday and Saturday, being January 25th and 26th, before their flight left on the 27th. The goal was to raise a little extra money for souvenirs at the theme parks. On the morning of Friday, January 25th, 2019, Liz went to Starbucks a little after 6 a.m. for coffee. She returned at 6:16 to the house she shared with Sergio in Tomball, Texas, a suburb of Houston. For the next half hour, she and Sergio could be seen on a neighbor's security camera, setting up displays of items for the sale. At 6:48 a.m., Sergio left in a white van to go to work. At 6:51 a.m., the security camera shows a black Nissan Frontier pickup truck, a vehicle that had been spotted on other cameras in the neighborhood earlier, driving into frame. The truck executes a 3-point turn and parks behind Liz's car. Someone leaves the truck and walks into the frame from the right, heading directly towards the driveway where Liz is still setting up. The two figures interact for about 6 seconds, and then suddenly, the stranger extends an arm and shoots Liz 3 times. The first bullet goes through her neck and hits the house behind her, where police will later recover it. The second and third shots bury themselves into her chest. Liz falls on her back, and the shooter fires a fourth shot directly into her face, killing her. The shooter then calmly walks back to the truck and leaves. A few seconds later, the Nissan Frontier comes speeding back into the frame from the right, jumping the curb before getting all 4 tires back onto the asphalt and speeding away. 2 minutes after the killing, the truck is seen driving past the house again. After that, it was picked up on several security cameras and then disappeared in an area with no camera coverage. Unfortunately, there are no clear shots of the killer's face or the truck's license plate. 3 different neighbors called 911. Liz was rushed to the hospital via helicopter. However, her injuries were too catastrophic for her to be saved. She was pronounced dead on Saturday afternoon, and her organs were donated. In death, Liz Barraza saved 4 lives, and her corneas gave a 5th person their sight. On February 1st, on what would have been Liz and Sergio's 5th wedding anniversary, her family and friends held a public vigil at the house. They raised wands and lightsabers toward the sky to demand justice for Liz. But so far, justice has been very slow to come. As of the writing of this video, despite a $50,000 reward for information, the murder of Liz Barraza remains unsolved. And in the absence of hard facts, rumors and speculation are bound to run wild. If you look at the security video, or stills from it, you'll see that the murderer and the victim take up only a few pixels each. There isn't really enough detail to make out faces or the license plate, however, there are still a few tantalizing possible clues. The figure of the murderer is mostly light in color, and they are wearing a thigh-length garment that seems to fit closely at the waist but flaps freely around their hips as they are walking across the street. Whether it's a short robe, a jacket, or something else is unfortunately impossible to determine. They also appear to be pretty close to Liz in height, and the combination of their short stature and the fact that something flutters behind their head as they walk away has led some to conclude that the killer is a woman with long hair, possibly wearing a short bathrobe. It probably does sound strange to theorize that someone went out in their bathrobe to commit a murder, but honestly, everything about this killing is strange, and a short woman in a bathrobe isn't the only possible explanation. You've probably heard that you are most likely to be murdered by someone close to you. This may sound counterintuitive, but it makes sense when you think about it. Killing someone is hard work and it's very high risk, and most people don't do difficult high-risk things unless they have a very good reason. It's hard to come up with a good reason to kill someone that you've never met. And for someone to go through all of this trouble to put 4 bullets into a woman setting up a garage sale, it was probably personal. At least to them. And yes, I can hear you shouting at the screen that Sergio must have done it. And Sergio has been a popular suspect pretty much from day one, but he's not the only suspect. And there are several good reasons to think it's not him on the video. The black truck could be seen on video driving around other parts of the neighborhood, while Sergio was still in the driveway helping Liz set up. The 4 minutes between Sergio's departure and the shooting really doesn't leave much time for him to switch vehicles, change into a bathrobe and wig, and come back to kill his wife. And perhaps most importantly, Liz was significantly shorter than Sergio, almost a full head shorter in fact, according to most of the photos that I've seen of them together. And I can't think of a way really for someone to suddenly lose that much height and miraculously gain it back by the time police show up to ask them questions. Of course, that doesn't mean that the killer on the video isn't connected to Sergio in some way, but it doesn't mean that there is a connection either. Some internet detectives have suggested that the shooter may be wearing some kind of disguise or costume. In August of 2019, a blogger on True Crime Society wrote, "I've searched this list of approved 501st costumes and studied every single female costume in here. A few of them closely resemble what could have been worn by the killer. Could her murder somehow be linked to the 501st Legion lifestyle? That's definitely a rabbit hole I have traveled down." While I'm not a fan of the phrase 501st Legion lifestyle, it's definitely true that cosplayers can pull off some remarkable physical transformations. Just looking at various photos of Liz in her Star Wars and Harry Potter costumes show how a change of outfit can make someone look completely different. Could Liz have died at the hands of someone from the world that brought her so much joy? Someone who was unlikely to be recognized outside of whatever they wore to commit the crime? Maybe. Or maybe not. Another avenue that many have theorized could have been the motive was Sergio's own father being the one responsible. The reasons behind this are because, for one, Sergio himself has accused his father of the crime, or at least was the mastermind behind it. This comes from a conversation that Sergio stated occurred between Liz and his father when Liz was complaining about Sergio's paycheck bouncing. Sergio, after all, worked for his father, and he would be the one to point the finger at for a paycheck bouncing. Some say the reason for the paycheck bouncing was because Sergio's father himself was having some serious financial issues due to his numerous affairs. If Sergio and his father planned Liz's killing and it worked, then Liz's $500,000 life insurance policy would cause any financial problem to disappear. And from that one theory alone, we have two of the biggest motives for murder: money and revenge. The theory that Sergio's dad either hired someone or did the killing himself is still debated to this day, but given how the crime, at least to me, seems highly orchestrated, almost professionally done, it causes me to hesitate on ruling this theory out. This unfortunately is just one of the numerous theories that I have come across with this case. I've read stories that Sergio did it for the life insurance money, that a member of the 501st did it because they wanted to be with Sergio, that it was a gang initiation, a case of mistaken identity, organ harvesting, an angry ex-lover, and a maniac who simply wanted to kill. And that's what makes the case of Liz Barraza so disturbing. Maybe she knew her killer, or maybe she didn't. Maybe it was some kind of wild cosplay drama with tragic consequences. Maybe she was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. It could have been one of the hundreds of different scenarios that online sleuths have dreamed up. Or it could be something that no one has thought of yet. All we know for sure is that one quiet morning on a sleepy suburban street, somebody did the unthinkable to a woman whose friends described her as someone who never met a stranger. And if it could happen to Liz, who else could be in the crosshairs?
Well, it sounds like something out of a horror movie. A man is killed, his corpse defiled, and then dismembered. Authorities have identified the suspect.
What we know about him, Rosemary, is that he is a narcissist extraordinaire, to the point that he even posted his own video of him, committing this very, very horrific crime. Fury that he targeted to people who he felt were standing in his way. So basically, the portrait of a man that people are looking for is a very disturbing one to show. And of course, that's this man.
Some people will do anything to be famous. The streets of Los Angeles are teeming with people who come from all over the world in hopes of becoming celebrities. A quick scroll through YouTube or TikTok will turn up dozens, if not hundreds, of people vying for your attention, hoping that this clip or that stunt will be what finally makes them a household name. Hell, people still audition for reality TV shows even though you probably can't name a single contestant from more than a year ago. Famous for a season is still famous. But not everyone has the same definition of fame, and sometimes the price of that fame is paid by someone whose name will never make it into the headlines. On May 25th, 2012, users on the shock website bestgore.com found themselves looking at something outrageous even by their standards. They were used to seeing videos of beheadings, grisly industrial accidents, and suicides. But the 11-minute clip that went under the title, "One Lunatic, One Ice Pick," was something new. The video showed a man tied to a bed frame as someone repeatedly stabbed him over and over again in the chest with a long, thin weapon that did indeed look like the titular ice pick. Once the man was dead, his killer picked up a kitchen knife and proceeded to cut up the corpse, actually feeding some of the flesh to a dog and cutting off other pieces with a knife and fork as if he were preparing for a meal. The audio track included the sound of the New Order song True Faith blasting in the apartment where the victim was killed, and the camera showed a poster for the classic 1942 film Casablanca hanging on a wall nearby. Reactions to the video were mixed, to say the very least. Some users demanded that the owner of the website take the video down and report it to the police. Others insisted that it had to be fake. Regardless, the video racked up 300,000 views in its first 4 hours online, and people began posting reaction videos to YouTube, showing themselves shaking and crying and urging their viewers not to seek out what they had just watched. Mark Merrick, the owner of Best Gore, would ultimately be charged with corrupting public morals under Canadian obscenity laws. But for some users, the question wasn't what should be done about the site hosting the video. It was who had uploaded it, and more importantly, why. Most of the big hit videos on Best Gore weren't made for Best Gore. Some of them came from security cameras that happened to capture grisly events. Others were deliberately staged in film for some other purpose, like taunting authorities or sending a political message. They went up on Best Gore after they'd done what they'd originally been meant to do. Best Gore was simply all about curation. But One Lunatic One Ice Pick hadn't appeared anywhere else online before it landed on Best Gore. It seemed like it had been deliberately created to shock the shock site. But who would want so badly to be internet famous that they'd film themselves committing a capital crime? You see, the video unfortunately wasn't fake. And it wasn't the filmmaker's first shot at fame. And it wasn't over yet. On May 26th, a lawyer in Montana reported the video to multiple law enforcement organizations, including the FBI. But his tip was ignored. 3 days later, on May 29th, a bloodstained cardboard box decorated with a red heart was delivered to the national headquarters of Canada's Conservative Party in Ottawa. A high-ranking staffer opened it and discovered a severed left foot, already stinking from decomposition. Canada's mail service went on high alert, and soon a second bloody box was discovered in a mail processing center. This one containing a severed left hand and addressed to the Liberal Party. Meanwhile, a janitor in Montreal found a rotting torso in a suitcase on a garbage pile behind an apartment building. Police searched the alley where the suitcase was found and turned up bloody clothes and papers connecting that particular heap of trash to a former tenant of the building, and his name was Luka Magnotta. Security camera footage from inside of the building showed someone who looked very similar to Luka hauling multiple garbage bags outside. When police searched apartment 208 inside of the building, they found blood on the mattress, inside of a fridge, and inside of a bathtub. The bathroom floor was spattered with blood, and there was a blood-soaked shower curtain that stank horribly. Inside a closet, someone had scrawled in red marker, "If you don't like the reflection, don't look in the mirror. I don't care." The tenant of that room, Luka Magnotta, was nowhere to be found. On May 30th, authorities confirmed that the foot, hand, and torso belonged to the same individual, but the gruesome surprise didn't end there. On June 5th, a right foot was delivered to St. George's School, a private prep school for boys in Vancouver, British Columbia. A package containing a right hand arrived at False Creek Elementary School, also in Vancouver, both packages having originated in Montreal. On June 13th, authorities matched the DNA of the dismembered body to a missing person, and the victim finally had a name. Jun Lin was a 33-year-old computer engineer from China. He'd been enrolled at Concordia University in Montreal, and everyone who knew him spoke well of him. He was able to live openly as a gay man in Canada, something that really wasn't possible back home in Wuhan. And he had been in a committed relationship with another man for about a year and a half. Lin's family in China hadn't been aware of his sexual orientation, and there were reports that they were pressuring him to find a nice girl and settle down. The two lovers had separated in mid-May of 2012 when Lin's boyfriend returned to China, but they managed to stay friends after the breakup and texted each other frequently until May 24th. That was the last day anyone saw Lin alive. It is also theorized that that was the day that he met Luka Magnotta. Luka Rocco Magnotta had started life under a different name, Eric Clinton Kirk Newman, though I'll keep calling him Luka to avoid any confusion because he had a lot of aliases. He grew up in a difficult family. His father was eventually diagnosed with schizophrenia, and his mother abused her children, often locking them out of the house and once dumping the kids' pet rabbits outside on a cold night to freeze to death. Young Luka bounced between his mother's home and his grandparents, and he was homeschooled for some time, where he later said that he was taught that the world was a dirty and dangerous place. He spent 2 years in a public high school where his classmates would later describe him as very vain and obsessed with his looks. He was also obsessed with movies. His favorite titles included both Casablanca and American Psycho. And after learning about the crimes that Luka committed, the latter makes a lot of sense. By the time Luka was in his early 20s, he was working as a stripper and appearing in a few adult films. But his adult film career didn't really go anywhere, and soon he was finding other ways to feed his appetite for money and fame. In 2004, he was accused of befriending a woman with the mental capacity of a child, getting her to apply for credit cards, and using those cards himself to rack up massive bills. Police also alleged that he sexually assaulted the woman and videotaped it, though that particular charge was later dropped. He pleaded guilty to the credit card charges and got a 9-month non-custodial sentence and 12 months of probation. In the second half of the 2000s, he ramped up his efforts to make a name for himself. He auditioned for a reality TV show, now going by Luka Magnotta. He created dozens of fake accounts on Facebook and various forums, hyping up his modeling work and his minor roles in adult films, calling himself the next James Dean. In 2008 alone, he had been in a back and forth with Wikipedia, trying to keep a page about himself active, even though it didn't really meet the site's notability standards. He also advertised himself as an escort online under the name Jimmy. One client actually left a review describing him as cold and remote. And then, in late 2010, he posted a video to YouTube under the title, "One Guy, Two Kittens." By the way, if you're noticing a pattern in the video's titles and you're not sure why it's there, congratulations on being young enough to miss that era. Luka's kitten video wasn't up for long, but it did make an impression. I'm not going to state what he does to those kittens in the video, but I will say that it was bad enough to cause most viewing it trauma that will never leave their minds. I know, because I saw it. The clip was removed from YouTube in a hurry, but not before animal rights activists saw it and started a digital manhunt. They created a group called the Animal Beta Project, or AB Project for short, and they tried to identify everything visible in the video in an attempt to track down the person who made it. They pointed out the people who abuse animals can escalate to harming human beings. And in Luka's case, they were right. They actually made a documentary about this exact manhunt called Don't Fuck with Cats. The digital sleuths had trouble tracking Luka down, however, even as he posted more videos. Luka used a series of online aliases to hype up each video before it dropped. And then on May 15th, 2012, Luka's alter egos began posting about something new. "Where can I watch the One Lunatic, One Ice Pick video?" one of them asked. And 9 days later was when Jun Lin disappeared. By the time the last of Luka's gory packages had arrived, police had joined the hunt the AB Project had started. Interpol issued a red notice for him requesting that any Interpol member that found him were to arrest him and extradite him back to Canada immediately. He moved around Europe for about a week before police finally tracked him down in an internet cafe in Berlin. And true to his vain nature, when he was arrested, he was in the middle of reading articles about himself online. Luka admitted to killing Lynn, but claimed he wasn't responsible for his actions because of various mental health problems. A 10-week trial ensued, and Luka was ultimately convicted and sentenced to life in prison. He continued to try to make himself a celebrity in the years since his conviction, taking any opportunity to get into the news. A 2015 article in the Vancouver Sun described him collecting pen pals and telling them how much he liked the food in prison and how much he enjoyed having snowball fights and hot chocolate with fellow inmates. It all sounded calculated to simply create outrage the moment it lands in a newspaper. Oh, and he also coaxed his various correspondents into sending him thousands of dollars to spend on really whatever he wanted in the prison canteen. As of the writing of this video, Luka Magnotta still doesn't have his own Wikipedia page. A search for his name links to the perpetrator section of the article, The Murder of Jun Lin. Concordia University had established a fund to create the Jun Lin Award, a financial award designed to help students from China attend the university. In a public statement, Lin's family thanked the university for memorializing their son. They ended with the words, "To commemorate Jun Lin, please let us remember his kindness, diligence, and love for life." One thing that has always been fascinating to me on YouTube is lost media. I know most everyone watching this video is aware of what lost media is, but for those of you who are hearing about it for the first time, allow me to briefly explain. Lost media is usually a film or a video, but sometimes audio recordings, video games, still images, or even text that definitely existed at one point, but is now inaccessible or lost. Most lost media gets lost through perfectly ordinary means. A fire in a vault at a movie studio destroys the last copies of the movies that the studio made. Or an early TV show was broadcast live and not recorded at all. You get the idea. And then there's the other way media gets lost. It existed at one point and someone deliberately prevented its release or pulled it out of circulation. For example, the two teenage boys who killed 13 people at Columbine High School in 1999 left behind videotapes of themselves that are rumored to explain their motives. But some of those tapes have never been released to the public out of fear that they would provide inspiration or instructions for copycats. This is a story about the second kind of lost media. It's not completely lost yet. If you look hard enough, you can still find it, but I am going to advise you to not seek it out. It is one of those things that you cannot unsee. Xiao Qiumei was a 23-year-old tower crane operator in the city of Suzhou in eastern China. Tower cranes are used to lift heavy loads high in the air, and you'll usually see them on large-scale construction sites for projects like high-rise buildings. Xiao was relatively young to be operating such a powerful machine. In the United States, the average age of a tower crane operator is in their mid-40s, and the certification process makes it the kind of job you can't just walk into off the street. But by all accounts, Xiao loved her work, and she took pride in helping to build the future of her rapidly developing city. She was married and a mother of 2 children. She also had more than 100,000 followers on TikTok. According to the British tabloid The Sun, Xiao was something of an influencer who would often post videos and live streams from inside the cab of her crane, talking about her job and giving viewers glimpses into a world that few people get to see. This is a pretty popular niche on social media, with people posting similar content like train operators or people who work massive construction equipment. On June 20th, 2021 at 5:40 p.m., Xiao was finishing her workday and getting ready to go home. There are some conflicting accounts of what exactly happened at the time. The Sun claims that she was live streaming from inside of the crane with her phone in her hand, but they also quote her family as saying that she was extremely professional and kept her phone in her bag during work hours. Then again, 5:40 p.m. might have been outside of those work hours. And this is where I ran into the media coverage that is entirely in Mandarin, so forgive me if I made a few mistakes on what I read. Regardless of how professional Xiao was or wasn't at work, sometime around 5:40 p.m., someone was streaming a video from her phone to TikTok. And at some point, Xiao took a step she would, very briefly, live to regret. Witnesses on the construction site saw Xiao fall from the crane. Reports claim that she had her phone in her hand. A video clip appeared online shortly afterwards showing scaffolding and other equipment blurring past the camera with occasional glimpses of a sky broken by sunlit clouds. The still images used in most of the articles about Xiao are almost beautiful if you don't know what they are allegedly from. The crane was 160 feet, or about 49 meters tall. An adult human body hitting the ground from that height would strike with a lot of force. I ran the numbers through a car crash impact calculator, and as near as I can tell, it's the equivalency of suddenly being pressed under 6,700 pounds or 3,000 kilograms of weight. For reference, that's like having two mid-sized cars suddenly sitting on top of you. It won't surprise you to hear that Xiao didn't make it home that day. By the time her story landed in the English language news a month later, it had been turned into some kind of twisted morality tale. The vain, vapid influencer who supposedly died for a few more livestream views. A video clip alleged to be taken from her final livestream and supposedly showing the moments of her fall has been passed around the internet like a ghoulish Pokemon card. Maybe it's real, and maybe it's not. Either way, I don't recommend that you seek it out. If it's fake, you're letting your clicks reward someone who made a fake snuff film. If it's not, well, she had a family, including 2 kids. How do you think they feel about that video being out there? Xiao Qiumei was a human being. She was the mother of 2 children, and she was someone doing a very difficult, dangerous, and important job who wanted to share her perspective with the world. She was just an ordinary person like any of us. An ordinary person who just took one wrong step.